Good morning, everybody. And apparently, when we started Liverpool 2008, I came out with that immortal phrase. It was just like organising a great Scouse wedding. And I just made that comment down here, and somebody said, well, actually, could you bring this wedding to order? So I'm just here to get everybody's attention to say, good morning, welcome. And now I'm going to hand over to our Mayor, Councillor Patricia Logue, to get things underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to our wonderful city to be part of cracking the cultural code 10 years on, organised by Derry City and Strabane District Council to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the City of Culture accolade. I am delighted that the TV producer and screenwriter and chairperson of the UK City of Culture Independent Advisory Body, Sir Phil Redmond, has taken time out of his busy diary to explore our city's experience as the first-time City of Culture 10 years on, and has been the driving force behind the development of this conference. Today's conference is hugely significant, not only because it allows us to look back at the last 10 years and see how far we have come, but it also provides us with an opportunity to share the journey experience with others and hear from different perspectives and cultural backgrounds on how the impact the title has on cities and communities. I am delighted to see such a wide variety of people coming together today for this special occasion. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all, including representatives from Liverpool who were involved in their bid for the European Capital of Culture and the subsequent hosting of the Eurovision. The representatives from other bidding cities of culture, past and present, including Wexham and Bradford, and closer to home, our colleagues from Armagh. A big welcome also to our local organisations who are leading on the delivery of our own arts and culture strategy as part of our code delivery process. Officers from Derry City and Strabane District Council and Visit Derry, and a welcome to Minister Andrews and colleagues from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who have been a key support to this process, and a particular welcome and thanks to our funders, the Department for Communities. You're all very welcome. When we look back at our City of Culture journey, from the application process to securing the title and the implementation of the programme, it is important to acknowledge the work and dedication it took to bring the idea to life. The City of Culture accolade had a huge impact on our local communities and the wider arts and cultural sector. It created a new narrative for our city and allowed us to move the discourse to a strong and positive message about what we have to offer. I am delighted to see that a key element of this conference will look at the important role played by culture in everyday lives, to looking at ways in which we can unlock our city's potential. Today's conference will give us the chance to hear at first hand the experience of other cities who have learnings from being involved in the City of Culture process, and to share with the audience our own positive experience. But it will also allow to really appreciate how far we have come since we first started this journey, and how we are now a confident city with a new sense of pride to tell our own unique and fascinating story. The process and the last 10 years have not been without challenges, and indeed, we are all aware of the challenges which we face, not least our cultural sector, and today's discussion will not shy away from that and will reflect on our own internal discussion held with the sector earlier this year, taking a realistic look at how the accolade has shaped the last 10 years and how we could face the future. I hope that the many delegates here today will avail of the chance to see our city later this evening and enjoy our programme of events scheduled as Culture Night this evening. You can enjoy a cultural explosion and feasts of events at venues across the city and district, with everything from workshops to museum exhibits, live music and dance to book readings, circus and carnival. Events go on all over the Wheeler, all over the weekend, with Féile le Céile at Cultureland, Traditional and Beyond at Echo Echo, continuing, and the One World Festival tomorrow. In the meantime, enjoy the conference, and I hope that the discussions will bring back fond memories of 2013 and the magical moments we all experienced. Thank you. I'd just like to introduce now the MP to come up and say, Stuart Andrews, to say a few words. And after that, we're going to be looking at a video of the highlights of what an amazing year we had on 2013. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Mayor, for that kind introduction. And can I also say a big thank you to the team at Derry City and Strabane Council for an extension of their invitation to me to come and say a few words at this conference today. It really is a pleasure to be here in person to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Derry Londonderry's term as City of Culture in 2013, or should I say, legendary, as I understand it became affectionately known. This is a fantastic opportunity for partners, including previous winners, to reflect and share learnings. Inspired by the success of Liverpool's term as European Capital of Culture in 2008, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport launched the UK City of Culture competition in 2019. And I am not surprised, as I was also the Eurovision minister. Yes, believe it or not, we have a minister for the Eurovision Song Contest, and saw how great that city did in hosting that amazing event. And Claire, it's great to see you here today. As many of you will know, once every 4 years, DCMS invites prospective bidders from across the United Kingdom to set out their vision for culture-led regeneration. The title helps to stimulate economic growth, creating jobs and attracting inward investment, and leads to a lasting legacy of social, cultural, and economic change. Derry was, of course, our very first City of Culture in 2013. I know that the team has enjoyed immense success, both during and after this term. In 2010, when Derry Londonderry was chosen as the winner of the 2013 competition, DCMS noted that the expert advisory panel's decision was unanimous. The city presented a compelling cultural programme. Furthermore, the enthusiasm and commitment of Derry Londonderry residents and the programme's supporters was unmatched. We know that winning this title confers real benefits. If you permit me, I would like to highlight just some of these. Surveys showed that 81% of all residents and 83% of residents living in the most deprived parts of Derry Londonderry attended a City of Culture event. Research by Queen's University Belfast with school children showed that 84% felt more proud to be from the city as a result of City of Culture 2013. Capital investment associated with the City of Culture designation facilitated in part the regeneration of the city's public realm. Much of the Derry Londonderry's teen programme was also staged in this part of the city. The spectacular opening ceremony that took place in Guildhall Square, with BBC Radio 1's Big Weekend and the Turner Prize hosted here too. And yesterday, I saw for myself how the spirit of culture has continued in this city, seeing ambitious plans for the renovations of St Columb's Hall. In fact, I thought that the local MP, Colin Eastwood, wasn't going to let me out until he got secured even more money for that regeneration. But also seeing the great work of the Play Trail, and the work that the Liberty Consortium have done, and also their amphitheatre that they have that now welcomes all sorts of organisations. In fact, their CEO, Mark Roberts, said to me that when it was completed, he stood in the middle of this amphitheatre and said to the people who built it, "Oh, it actually works, doesn't it?" To which there was confused looks from those saying, "Of course it bloody works." But, you know, observing the scale of change and the boost to the pride in place in Derry Londonderry, the competition has grown in scope as other cities have decided to bid for the title themselves. Hull was selected as the next City of Culture in 2017, having previously bid for the 2013 title. 9 out of 10 Hull residents reported that the City of Culture programme had a positive impact on the city. Coventry, UK City of Culture in 2021 secured over £170 million of investment associated with the title. Activity took place in each of the city's neighbourhoods, with 43% of tickets issued to citizens who were experiencing financial difficulty. Over a third of the cultural programme was co-created with local communities. And I'm delighted to not only see representatives from Bradford, the next City of Culture, and of course my next door neighbours from my constituency, but also Wrexham, where I used to be a councillor many years ago, and also of course Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon in attendance here today. ABC was one of 8 places longlisted for the 2025 title. Wrexham was one of the 4 shortlisted places. Bidding for the title can have a hugely positive impact. Previous bidders report that the process brought local partners together to develop strategic and cohesive cultural leadership. In turn, this has enabled them to showcase and open up access to local heritage, art and culture. As we start to prepare for the next competition, we will consider the feedback we have received from previous bidding teams and title holders. So forums like these, where bidding teams and experts can come together, are extremely valuable. I've spoken about the many benefits of winning this title, not discounting the benefits of bidding, but as with any major event, we can always do more to maximise and consolidate impact. My officials and I are keen to learn from your experiences and to share your knowledge. I know the Bradford team are also keen to learn from everyone here today. The Derry Londonderry team have proposed that we crack the cultural code. It has been 10 years since Derry Londonderry was awarded the City of Culture title. The importance of sustained, considered reflection on programme, impact and legacy, and of course, robust evaluation has become increasingly apparent. So the conference today rightly focuses on this. We should remember, however, that this is an opportunity to celebrate Derry Londonderry's phenomenal achievements and those of subsequent winning and bidding teams and cities. I want to thank the District Council again for extending an invitation to this event and for the opportunity to speak today. I am convinced that we'll learn today that we will learn that what we can shape the future of this country, and I very much look forward to hearing from you all, and I hope that today's event is a huge success. Thank you.
Speaking with our fingers crossed. Remember when we were everything? We lived among sea creatures. Remember we promised we'd never change. It's now that you're fading, I realize you still mean everything to me. Silver cities rise, the morning lights, the streets admire them, and sirens call them on with a song. It's asking for the taking, trembling of shaking. Oh, my heart is aching. We're coming to the edge, riding on the water, coming through the fog, your sons and daughters. With a great and small, stand on the star, the laser trail of desire through the darkening dawn. It's asking for the taking, trembling of shaking. Oh, my heart is aching. We're coming to the edge, riding on the water, coming through the fog, your sons and daughters. Let all the dreamers wake the star, the new Jerusalem.
Great. Sorry for the false start there, but I didn't have the film on my running order. Anyway, as every great conference, we are now running late, so I'll try and speak a little bit faster. But this is the bit I always like. This is the bit when I stand up and I find out what I'm about to say. Anyway, So, hope for a great sea change. Belief that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. As soon as I saw that on the front of Derry's bid in 2013, tick, do we have to do the rest? And I think in terms of, the slogan cracking the cultural code, it's actually encapsulated everything that we wanted to achieve with UK City of Culture. And it has actually been a kind of almost subliminal byline to everything that we do. And they asking each city, what is your culture? Define your culture. Simple question, difficult answer. And through that culture, what great step change are you going to bring about? How are you all going to come together and use that culture and go from where we are to where we go. Now, some of you will know that I have of Irish heritage, and one of the great things I've always lived by is what my relatives used to say to me about the great Irish directional advice when asked directions to anywhere. Basically, if I was you, I wouldn't start from here. But here we are, and forward we must go. And I think that's what I really want to try and return us to today. And I want to also talk to you about culture and this world of, or as we sit enthralled to the world of artificial intelligence, or why culture is important. We always attend these conferences and we always stand up and say, culture's important, isn't it? It's great. We need more of it. And every kind of evaluation that comes in says, we're marvellous. And if we had more money, we could be even more marvellous. But it doesn't actually answer what our good friends, the economists down there, really want to know, which is basically, well, if we give you the money, what are we going to get back? And I think this is the thing where we need to move forward. Culture is important. It really is. And I'm still amazed at how many people still don't get it. It's things like, things like words. Words are important, aren't they? Phrases are important. Things like green shoots, from tiny acorns, mighty oaks grow. All these things that artists come out with and throw out there, but they forget. Green shoots need to be fertilized. The acorn needs to land in the right spot. And I remember reading way back Solzhenitsyn's works, and Solzhenitsyn, when he was sort of fighting the Soviet Union, came out with this thing saying that every committee should have an artist, statutory artist, sitting at the end of the table to simply ask, why? Why are you doing that? Why can't we do this? Why can't we go this way? Because that thing that drives people to be creative, to be cultural, to be artistic, is a gene that remains curious. It's always wanting to know why, ask why. And we all remember the late great, well, probably above average, Sir Ken Robinson. And he and I became great friends. And I was always astonished that he became this world cultural guru on creativity, because he was an Evertonian. And then I suddenly realized that to be an Evertonian, you had to have imagination. You had to stand there at Goodison thinking, there's got to be more to life than this. And you also had to believe in leaps of faith. Every year, they believe they won't get relegated. And every year, they don't. And I always remember, I always would say to Ken, that's actually what gives you your shtick. That's really what it's about, isn't it? And I remember one of his great tales was the fact that he used to talk in his talks. And one of the things he used to say was walking around a classroom and kids were all drawing. Some of you might have heard this story. And he stopped by one kid and he was drawing a picture of somebody, and a 6-year-old. And he said, who's that? And he said, that's God. And Ken said, well, no one's quite sure what God looks like. And the kid looked up to him and said, they do now. And Ken was enraptured by that, all the time talked about that. How do we keep that sense of curiosity, that sense of challenge, that sense of wonder? We do it with our children, don't we? We start with sort of making funny noises and funny faces with paints, face paints, and making dens in the living room. We encourage them to experiment, make silly things. And as teenagers grow, they remain curious, and they want to see the world, and they see the world starting to open up. And that's when the trouble starts, because they start to see the world rather than what you tell them what the world is. But they like to experiment. And sometimes they like to experiment with the wrong things. But it's always that sense of curiosity. And education, when Ken used to say too, education is designed to knock all that out of us. Stop thinking like that, for God's sake. Just follow the rules, go on. But those who follow that creative cultural path, artistically, refuse, and they go off and they go over there usually. So it is important in this age of AI, because the thing about artificial intelligence, I know a little bit about artificial intelligence because I've worked with a few of them in the media. And it was where I came up with the phrase, the intellectual cabbage. Because when you look at a good cabbage, it's perfectly formed, it's round, it has many levels, but it's completely dense. And so artificial intelligence, in a sense, is not something to worry about, because at the back of artificial intelligence is actually human intelligence. It is, after all, a computer program. And it's the way it's framed, the way it's written, and the way it's taught to learn is all by people. And if you want to know a little bit more about artificial intelligence, there's a great series of BBC Reith lectures in 2021, Living with Artificial Intelligence. That's when I realised, that's what I've been doing all these years in the media. It's by Stuart Russell. He's a professor of computer science, and he's the founder of the Centre for Human Compatible Artificial Intelligence at the University of California, Berkeley. It's okay though, he's from Portsmouth. But if you listen to him, he talks about the fact that artificial intelligence is great. And anybody of you can remember that film, I, Robot? And the key line in that is, are you asking the right question? And that is the key with artificial intelligence. Are you asking the right question? And he gives a good example in those talks about setting the task of climate change and saving coral reefs to artificial intelligence. How do we do that? It comes back with a fantastic solution. It's brilliant. Coral reefs are all returned to pristine after 5 years. Everything's wonderful. The oceans are clean. Everything's marvelous. Unfortunately, it depends on taking 40% of the oxygen out of the atmosphere, and all the humans are dead. But it did its job. It was asked, how do we clean things? And when I was back in the 90s, I was chair of something called the International Centre of Digital Content, and we were in all this, looking over the horizon as to where all this would be coming. And my two great examples from that time with artificial intelligence, the guys used to talk about was, how can a 6-foot person bridge an 8-foot gap? Answer, grow to 10 feet and reach. Or the other one, which was, in a world of diminishing resources and an expanding population, how can humanity survive? Artificial intelligence, have more babies and eat them. There's nothing wrong with the answer. The answer is perfectly logical. And that is the point. We have to make sure that artificial intelligence is programmed with our own cultural values. And again, the three rules of robotics are do not harm humans, do not kill humans, do not break the first 2 rules. So whenever we're looking at what artificial intelligence will do, we have to make sure that it's filled, or it's actually programmed, with our cultural biases. And then that's the big danger of it, is whose bias is actually going to be in it. And we're going to end up in the future with American artificial intelligence and European artificial intelligence and Chinese artificial intelligence all spying on each other. So, and I think that's where culture is really important. And we need to create critical thinkers. And that is where the real demand in the future is. It's not about maths, Minister. If you could just point this out to the Prime Minister. Maths is good, but they should also do drama at the same time while they're incarcerated till the age of 18. It is Solzhenitsyn's point that when they're plotting everything out and planning everything, someone needs to be saying, why? Why are we doing that? Let's push forward. Let's move forward. So in other words, artificial intelligence will only do what we tell it to. And it is about cultural values. So how do we build the pipeline of critical thinkers? But we need to come back and ask that question about what is culture. And I always look at this and think it's a bit like asking what is football. And it brings me back to Ken and the Evertonians. But if you say to someone, what is football? And football is all about kids in schools and going to soccer clubs and playing together in schools, and then playing for the school, and then playing for the county, and then joining pub team, and then playing non-league, and then you joining the National League and moving to the Premiership, and then the European League, international competitions, before you even get into gender. And same with culture. Culture, I've always summed up as the sum of all our creativity. It's what we all do together. And as I say, you know, the expression, well, every single one of us today has come on a different journey to be in this room. But here we are, we're all sharing this one event. And today we are a cultural tribe here. When we spread out later, we'll disappear and go back to doing all our different interests which overlap. And a cultural audience is very similar to a television audience. Demographics split. You do not get all ABs, you do not get all CDs, you do not get EDFs. You get this strange demographic curve like this, from the ABs up to the CDs and back down again. And so culture is about everything. It's about giving opportunities to everybody. That's what we need to think about. I like to think that's what UK City of Culture has been doing. It's been offering people an opportunity to shine, to try different things, to experiment, to feel safe, to do something completely different. So I think that's what I want to try and get out to today. I want to obviously here to celebrate what Derry's done. It's actually to take that moment in history in 2013 to become the first inaugural City of Culture. And with hindsight, it was a leap of faith. It was a leap of faith on behalf of the government to actually back the project. It was a leap of faith on behalf of the biddies having a go, of the bidders having a go at it. And what we thought of what City of Culture was in 2013 and what Derry did was fantastic. They actually took that cultural code and they moved it forward. But it changed when we moved to Hull. It changed when we moved to Coventry. It's changed again as we move to Bradford. And it will change again as we move to 2029, because we are learning all the time about if we've got this fantastic opportunity to actually focus our media and our culture on one city every 4 years. This is a fantastic opportunity for us to reset the cultural agenda. So each time it moves on. So I think Derry did a fantastic job at the time, you know, and laid the foundations. I always said, and I said to Hull, Derry have set a really high bar, you've got to push it. And they did, slightly different way. Coventry again, same thing, same challenge, they pushed it. Problem for Coventry, the pandemic. You know, that was unforeseen, but actual fact, some of their programming was almost as though it could have been designed for the pandemic, with the community programming, the way it was delivered, taking it out to the communities rather than communities coming to the city. So I think we can learn from that, and we can learn from everybody else. But the other thing I want to talk about is today, I really want to try and get out today, is this question of evaluation. And ask, you know, what are we actually evaluating? Are we evaluating the right things? And are we evaluating them at the right time? Are we sitting there waiting for something to happen and say, oh, did that work? was that any good? You know, or what can we learn from that for the next city? Where is the key moment that we really need to have robust evaluation models put in? Is it actually at the bidding stage rather than post-city? We need to put more into that. That's one of the things I want to try and explore today a little bit more. And I'm taking that really because the good thing about Ken Robinson, one of the lines he used to often finish his chats with was, well, we've tried everything else. Why don't we try something different? And that's what I want to try and come out with today. You know, we know in this room, we all know culture works, don't we? We all know that cultural intervention brings about so many benefits. We know it. But what we want to try and move to now is try something different. Let's figure out why. Let's figure out how. And how and what should we measure? Anyway, if you don't believe me, I was thought to myself, you know what? I'll ask AI what this is all about. So I typed in a simple question to AI. What are public, social and economic impacts of cultural activity? I said, oh my God, it's gone native. Anyway, it comes back. Public, social, economic impacts of cultural activities can be significant and multifaceted, contributing to the overall well-being of communities and societies. Here are some of the key ways in which cultural activities can have both social and economic effects. Community cohesion, cultural diversity and understanding, preservation of heritage, education and learning, mental health and well-being, social inclusion. Public economic impacts, tourism and revenue generation, job creation, cultural tourism infrastructure, creative industries, local businesses, real estate and property values, funding and investment. In conclusion, cultural activities have wide-ranging social and economic impacts that contribute to the vitality and prosperity of communities and societies. They enrich people's lives, foster connections, promote understanding, and drive economic growth. So there we are. AI agrees with us. So always look at, are you asking the right question? So, you know those people, if you're a Trekkie, you'll know data, won't you? So it's next question. Give examples of economic return or savings to public expenditure for cultural activity in the UK. Cultural activities in the UK contribute to economic returns and savings to public expenditure in various ways. Here are some examples. Tourism revenue, job creation, tax revenue, cultural export, real estate development, reduced healthcare costs, crime reduction, education and skill development, volunteers engagement, enhanced well-being. Marvellous. So we're all right so far. So I say, oh, that's interesting. Next question. New question. What is the total economic impact of public spending on culture in the UK? Key question. As of my last knowledge update in September 2021, I do not have access to real-time data of information beyond that date. Therefore, I cannot provide the most current figures on total economic impact of public spending on culture in the UK. Organisations like the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport in the UK often release reports detailing economic contributions. New question. What was the total economic impact of public spending on culture during 2019 in the UK? As of my last update in September 2021, I don't have access to specific figures. The Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport in the UK is a reliable source of such information. New question. What was the total economic impact of public spending of culture during 2012? Remember, it hadn't been updated since 2021, so 2019 was on the cusp. As of my last knowledge update in September 2021, I don't have access to specific figures for there. See the DCMS. New question. What were the conclusions of Hull University's evaluation of UK city culture 2017? Now that's been published. Yeah. As of my last update into sounds like an MP actually. The minister answering questions, doesn't it? Can I refer you to my earlier report? Okay, all right. Well, 2017. New question. Conclusions of Queen's University's evaluation. I'm sorry, but my last right. So what this tells you is there's enough data and literature out there for artificial intelligence to have learned from that culture and UK city culture is a good thing for all the reasons that we've all seen in so many evaluation reports. The problem is the data is not there to say why. So we're all in the same boat. So we need to, that's what I need to try and start this conversation today. How do we get the data? Where do we get data from? And when do we get the data? So I hope we can learn from Derry's journey, hear about what made them take that leap of faith back in pre-evaluation dataset days of 2010 to be the first and what happened next. And then we'll jump 10 years to talk to Amar, Rex and Bradford about why they decided to run. Was it a leap of faith, or was it a data-driven, calculated risk? And what signposts can we take for the future? And all this, of course, is building to the key moment of the day, the evaluation session later on, when we will ask the question, actually, what is an economist? Thank you. So we now move on. I think it's also my part-time role of MC. We're now going to move on to an absolutely thrilling session called Once Upon a Time with, who's this bloke? Oh yes, this Phil Redmond character is going to talk to Claire McColgan about Liverpool.
Wherever you want. This is very formal. I'm slightly nervous. Is that close? That's better. Thank
We're
you.
all mic'd up. I think we can sit like this. Liverpool was, I suppose, the first big leap of faith, wasn't it? And before that, I think this is actually just the first time that we've ever sat on a platform together
That's
and
why I'm
talked about
nervous.
Liverpool.
But can we start first by saying, Shona McCarthy and the people who put that programme together, that's the first time I've seen that video, and loads of people in this room must have been part of that. And I thought that was just wonderful. It really moved me. And an incredible thing that you all did in 2 years. To get something like that, of that quality in 2 years, is phenomenal. So all of you who were involved in that, absolutely brilliant. Let's start with that.
Well, let me kick off in the present. Is it 47% of all business rates of the city are now coming from culture?
Yeah, and I think that's grown. So if you think back to pre-2008, so we bid for the European Capital of Culture. We decided to bid in about 2000. And Lord Heseltine actually was in the city recently, and he has this very good quote that that at that point there was 1,000 hotel rooms. In Liverpool now there's 9,000. So if you think about that long-term investment in culture and what that's done for the city, it's huge. So 47% of Liverpool's business rates, which is all the stuff that goes back into adult social care, that goes back into education, that makes the city run, come from the visitor economy and come from culture. So come from retail, all that stuff that's grown up in our city over the last 20 years kind of pays for 47% of the business rates, which is a phenomenal thing, really. And it shows kind of the continued investment in something like culture and what that can do when you believe in it over a long period of time, you invest in it properly, and the results, for those of you who've been to Liverpool recently, you'll see yourselves, because it's fantastic.
But it didn't, I mean, that just didn't happen overnight, did it? I mean, what's it now? How many years ago now? 15?
15 years ago,
15
because
years
Liverpool
ago.
One, which is a big shopping development, celebrated 15 years yesterday, which is why I remember it's 15 years.
15 years ago. And I remember in 2008, when I was doing my sort of figurehead thing, talking to the media and telling them we didn't care what they think, we were just going to have our great party. I used to always get them to come and interview me at certain places in the city that we were trying to promote, show them all the great things. And I remember getting the BBC to come down to the arena, you remember our brand new arena as it was. And we also were very pleased to have a Pizza Express down in that area. It was big at the time. I thought it was great. We'll go, and I think I'll meet the BBC at this new hotel, Jury's, and we'll have a cup of coffee, and then we'll do the intro in front of the arena. And when I got to the hotel, I was about to walk in. This guy puts his hand up and says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." I said, "What?" He said, "Are you a resident?" I said, "No, I just want to come and coffee." "No, sorry, you can't." This is the weekend of the tall ships, and what, about 1 million people came into the city? This is what we were trying to do, bring people in. I said, "Why can't we come in?" "It's madness. Bedlam." He says, "We're having a blow. We've shut down." So I'm thinking, hang on a minute. I'm working hard here to bring all these people in so you can sell money, we can't come in. I said, "Okay." I said, "Tell you what, mate, I'm going to take them over to Pizza Express and get a cup of coffee. I'll give them the money." I just turned away. This guy says to me, "That's not a bad point, that. I'll mention that." And I went to go to Pizza Express, about to go in, and they go, "Whoa, ho, ho, ho." I said, "What?" He says, oh, we're run off our feet. We're just having a break. And so I'm making this point. Eventually the manager spotted me and brought me in and we sat down and had coffee. But I'm making this point because it's the journey, isn't it? It's taking people from that moment to where we are now. You would never get that now in the city, would you?
No, and it's all about confidence as well. I think when we bid, it was about that the city kind of lost its confidence, so it had forgotten what it had. So when we bid we were bidding against 18 other cities at the time for European Capital Culture. The local authority at that point in time was called the basket case of local authorities, which isn't a compliment. And the city had kind of got a new direction. It had got new political administration. It had got new chief executive. It wanted to really kind of really motivate the regeneration of the city, and it saw this competition for European Capital Culture, and it decided to go for it. But I think what time gives you is I can't quite believe now that at that moment in time, all Liverpool wanted was to be shortlisted. So all that great city, you know, without even talking about the Beatles, you know, 7 national museums, take Liverpool, the confidence of the city was so low that it just wanted to be shortlisted. And that is quite an incredible. Then we were shortlisted, then we weren't. And then over the last 20 years, kind of coming up to Eurovision, there was no doubt that we could deliver Eurovision in the way that we delivered it. And there was no doubt from the people, which is more important actually, there was lack of confidence from the people of the city in capital culture until the point when we delivered it. With Eurovision, there was absolutely no doubt in the people of the city that we would do the best Eurovision ever. And that's a 20-year journey actually. But it's a 20-year journey about a city that had been knocked 4 years, really knocked very hard, gaining its confidence back. And you just feel it now. And it's really hard for me looking back at 2003 and thinking, how has that changed so much? And it is because we put people's stories at the heart of our regeneration. So whatever's happened in Liverpool, and it's had its ups and downs, as you know, people may know, that story of its people and of its culture has been the constant narrative. And I think that's my learning of cities, you know, how you kind of take the people's story with you and you grow it, but it's not just a one-off. And what I would say about cities of culture, we never really planned a legacy. We didn't plan it. You know, we might say that we did, but we didn't plan a legacy. We planned a kind of city of culture programme every year for the last 15 years, and that's given us the legacy. Does that make sense? It wasn't a strategic kind of paper that sat on a shelf. It was about great programming with people's stories at the heart of it.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the people thing. Jump back again to the leap of faith, because David Henshaw was the chief executive at the time. And before I came here, I said to him, what was the real decision? When did you actually make the decision? Because there's apocryphal tales about who made the decision. And as we said, you know, like before the bid, there was 350,000 people who hated the decision. After the bid, there was 350,000 people who made the decision. Mm-hmm. So I said to him, what is the tale? And he said to me, it was he and the then leader, to his credit, Mike Story. They went to Shanghai, because Liverpool had not long twinned with Shanghai. And so they were being driven in from the airport, and the city was all dressed, about twinning with Liverpool, and great celebrations, a real buzz about the place and everything. And it was that stage, you know, late 90s, when Liverpool was at, you know, quite a low rate. And they just decided on that trip they should bid for the European Capital Culture. They just needed something. They didn't know what, something that would actually lift the city and get them back in the game. And so they also used it to bring in new teams of people, change the council, move things forward. But like I've discovered through the process over the last 10 years, a lot of places bid with the idea that they're not going to win, but the collaboration, bringing people together is what it's about. And that's all they were doing with Liverpool. And as it moved on, Newcastle moved out into pole position. You know, they suddenly sort of thought, well, you know, put a bit more into it and everything, and then realised actually, oh my God, they could win. You know, and he told me well, I won't say he told me this tale, but I then discovered one of the great things they did was when the judges came round, taxi drivers, key to everything. You know? And the taxi drivers used to leave their mics on and listen to what the judges were saying in the back, and then phone up tell them so the next day, whatever the judges were looking for was there on their doorstep, right? Right. And see that those Chinese could learn a lot from our taxi drivers. But we do have the oldest Chinese population thing. But it's kind of interesting. So that was definitely a leap of faith, wasn't it? But what you just said about how it's gone on then, that was also a kind of like a support of the then opposition leader, wasn't it, Joe Anderson? And his belief and his faith in it and everything. Do you think it happened because in the bid, focused on the people rather than the high art? That's how they bought into it.
It's really interesting. I think the programme was a real mixture of both. So I think when you look at the cultural programme that we put together, it was an incredible mixture of real kind of high-end, really unique and beautiful artists doing incredible things that were just moments in time. But there was also the mass participation community programme. It's different now because everyone does community programmes now. So everyone, engages their communities and stuff. At that point in time, it wasn't done as much. Capital culture was seen much more as a marketing tool, and we just would never have gone there in Liverpool. So the community work that we did, the fact that their voices were heard, the fact that the big major events didn't just happen in the city centre, all of those great things, the whole combination, I think, made the year and made it really special. And I think that's what's really interesting when you the next sort of 15 years is we've invested very, very hard in our cultural sector, because that's not, in the city, it's not my job to run the cultural sector of the city. It's the Philharmonic's job to do brilliant orchestral work that brings the best composers and the best artists into the city. And it's kind of more the city's job when we do the big kind of things like the big events that we do, to make sure that the whole city's engaged in it. And there's room for both. I think that's what makes great cities, when you let artists be artists and do absolutely brilliant, incredible work. And then you do brilliant work with communities as well. But they're equal. And I think when the balance goes, that's when the issue. And we got the balance right.
Yeah.
And then someone always said to me, "You've let the genie out of the bottle, and you'll never ever." And they said it's the politicians, because we've had quite a lot of change with politicians as well. But they said, "You let the genie out of the bottle, and you'll never be able to get it back in." And I think that's been absolutely key, because Liverpool people now, it's really interesting, because obviously every city's gone through austerity. We've all done that. But if there's any sense that any of the cultural stuff is being cut from Liverpool, there is a huge uproar. And bidding for Eurovision, bidding for things that are expensive, because it costs money to do events, there is never from Liverpool people a backlash, ever. It comes from the national media or it comes from the media. It never comes from people. And I think that's really interesting in the city, because they completely get it now. They completely get it. And again, that's a transformation in the last 20 years, but they're used to it. They get,
But how is that actually worked in practice then for you? I know the council's always been supportive and all that kind of stuff, but how does it work in practice? Is it because they've delegated it to you and you're working to a common aim?
I think it's quite odd in Liverpool. It's not usual for city councils. So I think, be careful what I say. It feels like we're having a really intimate conversation, and I look out and there's lots of people, so I've got to be quite careful what I say. But I think that, look, we've had quite a lot of change. But I think every chief executive and every leader of the council that has come in, whatever party that they're from, has got that thing that is very Liverpool. That is, you have got to provide that moment where people come together and have a common conversation. And they get won over. And there's two things. One, the kind of politicians in the city get very won over by some of the very big ideas. So when we're bringing 3 ships down the Mersey, when we're bringing giants in, when we bid for Eurovision, when we do the big sporting events. But they also get the fact that their people love it. So when they come out, Eurovision's a really good example. So we had elections in the middle of Eurovision. On the doorstep, it was the very, very one positive thing people talked about. And that is essentially a singing competition that you're doing, in this case, on behalf of another country. But it was hugely positive. So they get that, the politicians. So whatever party comes in, they completely let us do stuff, and they let us do stuff, and I think that's a really key. We don't do we do the administrative side of culture, of course we do, but we also bring big ideas to the city and big moments where the city can have an international spotlight, and they get it. So I think it's a bit of a mixture. There's not much convincing you need to do in Liverpool anymore.
No. So how do you talk about that sort of like the legacy almost evolved from it? everybody bought into it and they saw it. And I talk about the fact that I experienced that across the year, and I saw the city shoulders rise on the opening night.
Yeah.
And I saw the tears in people's eyes on the final night when we did the summary of the year, you know, and the like the holiday video. And from that moment on, people just wanted more, haven't they? So how do you actually, you know, hard question, I suppose, but how do you actually think about which things to go for? Are you doing it, are you data driven, or are you doing it instinctively? Are you thinking like, oh, the public will love this, they'll come out and see it, or whatever? What do you...
I should probably say we're data driven, but really not.
But you know why
so
I'm
I
asking
can't
this,
say
don't you?
that.
Because my media background, I'm always immediately
Looking at
thinking
Harry,
about what
that's-
demographic is this going to go to? You know, how are they going to appreciate it? Where's it going? What's the return going to be? So have you morphed into that?
I think I know how to program a city now. I think I learned that during capital culture. So you kind of know that what Liverpool will love and what suits it, and lots of things don't suit it. You know, there's some events that I wouldn't be interested in bringing to the city because they're not that they're colder, they're just they're just different. So I kind of know what people will love. But there's also real appetite now in the city that capital culture brought with new things. So before there was like, you know, we did a river festival, we did a festival called Matter, you know, there was a soul set program of events that were quite normal. And then you suddenly bring giants or spiders to the city that call down buildings or, you know, walk through the streets and there's a whole story around them and people start to expect that level of quality. So I think that bringing those sort of big ideas to the city and knowing how to program it, but also always trying to find that individuality within that project. So whether it is giants, you know, the Royal Deluxe giants do travel the world, but the Liverpool people think they're theirs, and the stories that they told on the streets of Liverpool in front of 1 million people was a Liverpool story. It was the story of the Titanic, or, you know, so it's kind of getting that absolute essence of a place through. And even when we did Eurovision, we were doing it on behalf of Ukraine, and that combination of doing something on behalf of another country for your own country, you know, because we're doing it on behalf of the UK, brought out a completely different side of the city as well. And I think it's always trying to tell a different story and not the same thing. I think that's what I've learned.
Yeah. So is it kind of, in a sense, the storytelling or the strategic plan?
I think it's a story. It's a storytelling. Our strategy is really clear. We fund our cultural organisations properly. They do the 300 odd days of the year programming that is brilliant in the city. So whenever people come, there is something going on. And then as a city, every 2 years we bring something incredible that kind of makes people look in a different direction at Liverpool. And that's a really clear strategy for us, and that's worked for 20 years. And we know how to do it now because, like you here, when you do something like that, it's not just the cultural organisations that come together, it's the police, it's the fire service, it's everyone that kind of all mucks in to make things happen. And that's what we get in Liverpool. They just all, it's not their day job, they just go, okay, we know what it means.
Yeah, and I think also just sort of looking back over that 15-year journey, because I remember when I got involved, there didn't seem to be those big Scout voices around the whole thing, you know. And
You made up for that.
What? I made up for that, yeah. But I also thought actually that was a good thing, you know, because the Scouts are arty, we're navel gazing. So it's a kind of an interesting thing about where does the city think at its starting point? About does it listen to its own voices and everything, or does it think about bringing in people who would be a little bit slightly more objective about the thing, and then allow their own people to grow? You know?
You've got to have a bit of both. I mean, you know, oh gosh, when we started in capital culture, it's probably similar here. You know, in the kind of late 1990s in Liverpool, it was quite parochial. You know, it was quite looking inwards. So if you weren't Scouts and you weren't from Liverpool, then you weren't, you know, it was just all of that. And you do get that in places. And then the city did a brilliant, they brought Sir Bob Scott in to do the bid, who certainly wasn't Scouts. He was from Manchester, which is even, in Liverpool terms, that's even worse.
Well, this was my biggest shock when I found all those Manx in the room.
Exactly, he appeared from Manchester. But it was a really brave thing to do because it was a parochial city at that point. It was all about, you know, you had to have been born there, bred there, and, you know, not moved from there in order to do it. And actually what is really, really, really important on any cultural programme is that you get new voices coming in. And I think what capital culture did for us is it opened up the whole city's eyes to the benefit of new and incredible voices. And that whole mixture now, I think, is really balanced. And so, you know, I've got young people working with me who grew up in Liverpool, you know, went to university in Liverpool and are working now, doing the most brilliant, but they're working with international artists and no one blinks an eye. And they want that. They want you, John Moots, to come up, you know, they want those big, brilliant names in our city. But that's taken a long time, I think, to get. And 2008 just literally did that. You know, so it's important. It's important to have both. You need the mixture.
Yeah. In our final seconds on the countdown clock here. So, choice, people or money?
What do you mean?
What drives a project? What's the main ingredient of every project?
People. But you need the money. You do need money as well. I mean, both actually.
Yeah.
Because you need people, but you need to dress. You know, you need that investment in the people in order to make something brilliant. Like the stuff we put into capital culture and we do it all the time is you make it look fabulous. You invest properly in it because it's important.
Yeah.
And you can't do it without
Well,
money.
you heard me say before and all that kind of thing. The money it's the right people first and the right money to
Yeah,
a
great
certain level.
ideas bring the money.
But creativity is making making the most of what you've actually
Yeah.
got. And then one final question then for you. Liverpool has a reputation of having done it, right? You're there, you do it. Would you encourage the city to bid for UK City of Culture?
Gosh, that's a really hard question, isn't it? Do you know what? We probably wouldn't, only because I think our story isn't that now. And I think it's all about storytelling, isn't it? You know, we've just done Eurovision. We need to think about what the next 10 years of Liverpool. And for me, that would be kind of looking back, and we always need to look forward. So I think that's just my opinion. The city might have different opinions, but I think for Liverpool, I would have done. You know, I would have absolutely gone for that prize and literally be fighting you all off, and you know, as part of it. But that our story has got to be about the future now, because we did European Capital of Culture, so it's got to be about the future.
I'm glad you said that because it means you and I'd have to resign from the panel. But I think the main thing is that it was at the very beginning. It was very, very much that leap of faith. Let's do it, sing it. And once we did it, we achieved it. It's sort of grown from there, and the whole city's embraced it.
Oh yeah, I think it's the most. I mean, I think you'll hear about this later, but to get all those people in a room to do what you do around a cultural, I mean, it's exactly what regeneration is about, and nothing works like culture to bring those people together. We saw it in every. I know Southampton. We saw it in every city we visited, didn't we? About it's a unifying thing.
Yeah. And one of my final word on this is that I often say to the council, when Liverpool actually believes it, when they talk about frontline services first and then they reach the council, the culture budget, I say that's the biggest mistake you're making, because culture is the frontline service. If you want to bring about any change, you've got to win minds and hearts. You've got to take people with you, and that's what we do with culture.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, thank you all. And I've got a hand up. And now I'm handing over to Dr. Adian.
Everybody, I'm going to sit down and just wait for my team to join me on the stage. And as always, time's against us. And of course, I had all these plans to say a whole lot of things and to spend a lot of time saying thank you. But I don't know if you, like me, I was nearly in tears watching the video. Because it brought back so many memories, and already this morning, the buzz that's in the room, if we could bottle it and, you know, give it out annually, where we all remember those memorable moments. So I'm delighted this morning to be joined by a panel of people who are sort of representative of the various bits and pieces of the jigsaw that came together. And, you know, I think Phil and Claire bring it all there. It was a privilege to follow through that vision from Liverpool. Particularly, we were a small city. Thought on the back of this, very pertinent, we were a small city, and this allowed us to become huge. And those early days, you know, weren't easy. We'd just done the work on the one plan. We had 189 priorities in the city. We'd boiled them down to 11 flagships, of which one was culture and tourism, of which the council and ILEX and a number of others felt there was an opportunity to really say, gosh, maybe we could put our city in the limelight. And the point made already this morning, I don't know whether we ever quite believed it. And I'll never forget the moment in this hall. And indeed, I was missing the party because I was in Liverpool when we won, and the absolute and utter euphoria. And I know a number of people in this room who have been personally, intimately involved in making it happen. And that I have a wonderful photograph of Una's teeth, because she was just, it's a brilliant, brilliant photograph of just absolute joy. So how do you bottle that? How do you make that part of the fabric? And in those days, I mean, we were, a city that really, the name, the fact that UK was in the title, the whole cultural identity issues, we were determined to have a joyous celebration, but we were determined to have purposeful inquiry and do something meaningful with this year. And to be honest, and I shouldn't say it maybe, but I think some people thought, well, all right, we'll let them go ahead because they're never ever going to get shortlisted. And then when we were shortlisted, the young people in this city and the cultural community just rose like that tidal wave that Phil mentioned in Heaney's wonderful words. And it had that sense of, I remember us approaching Gary Lightbody for Just Say Yes. And we were going, yes, we're going to say this. And he says, well, my granny's from Derry Londonderry, I can't very well say no. And it was that spirit of, gosh, maybe we could do this. And for me, one memory was the morning after we were shortlisted with Norwich and Sheffield and Birmingham. No, yes, that's right. And Birmingham Post had up a big headline saying, where the hell's Derry Londonderry? And that's all we needed. We said, right, we're going to show you where we are. So this morning, I'm delighted to welcome the panel. I'm not going to introduce them because you have the names in front of them, and I'm going to jump straight in and just hear from them what their memories and sense of achievement was. So just to confuse the sound now. So we'll start at the very beginning with Evelyn, because we couldn't have done this without the artists and the cultural sector in the city. And they were so inspirational and so magical in what they did. And when we won the bid, then subsequently the Culture Company, and Shona unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but the team that was led, Martin's here for the board that worked so closely with and indeed Claire was on the board as well, pulled together like 170 events. And don't forget, we only had 2 years. Bradford, you've got 4. You're probably wishing it was 2. But we only had 2 years to actually turn that around, and that was an absolutely astonishing achievement. Evelyn, what's memorable for you coming from that background?
Well, I suppose, and I guess I'm biased, the Fleadh Cheoil na HÉireann, the biggest platform, the Olympics of traditional music. Of course, you talked about the problems. We had problems in terms of putting on a festival of Irish music and culture under a UK title, but we overcame all those obstacles, and as Phil alluded to, we took a leap of faith, and it worked. It was a fantastic, the success of it was that it was a fantastic community event where people partook of it in lots of ways. We set out the achievement we set out to achieve were achieved, we feel, but the key to its success was communication. I think that and trust and acceptance of all the cultures and traditions. And when we had open, honest discussions with the communities that are diverse from us, and that open and honest discussion, I think, is the way to do it. Just lay all your cards on the table. This is what we are. We want you to be a part of it. And the whole city came together, and it was a really diverse musical and cultural festival. And I think it's still talked about as a great community event. And that's what's memorable for me. I think too, like, Derry has kind of had a profile for a number of years for a lot of reasons. But I think this kind of gave a new confidence to people. We're going to be talking and using a lot of cliches, so I apologise for civic pride and all the rest of it, but it didn't increase that. I remember, as well as the Fleadh, we did a collaborative project with an organisation called Musicians Without Borders, who work in areas of difficult areas using music as a tool. and there was a percussionist over from London, Eugene Skeef, and we talked, and the city looked wonderful, you know, and I said to him, but, you know, there's a hard edge to Derry, and he said, but I like that. That's what makes a city, you know, and I guess that's maybe what makes the UK City of Culture competition, for me, it's looking at cities like ours and giving them a platform, because we know what we can do, and we did it. And yeah, the Flower for me was fantastic, a fantastic success.
Brilliant. And I mean, we're delighted this morning to have Eamon with us, who's the president of Cultus. And I was just sharing with him before we started that I remember standing in the basement in Dublin with the PSNI beside me, a representative of PSNI, and this sort of surreal situation where we were pitching for the FLA, which had 450,000 people. And for those not from Derry, I mean, that's 4.5 times the population of the city. And they already had it, you know, it's like City of Culture, you have to bid well in advance. And Ennis stood to one side, and Sligo were still in the running. But Eamon, your memory of that?
Well, firstly, I was always very surprised it took such a long time for the FLA to come to Northern Ireland. That's the first thing, because the first FLA was held in 1951 when Cultus Culture was founded in Mullingar, and we had a wonderful FLA there again this year and last year. But it was a momentous occasion, and what I remember about it most is, well, of course, the music and the songs and the dances and all that went with the FLA, the Irish language indeed as well. But what I remember most about the FLA is that the people of Derry opened their doors and they opened their hearts and they embraced the FLA. And if that didn't happen, the FLA wouldn't have been as successful as it was. You're right, 450,000. This year we had 600,000. The FLA is growing and growing and growing. The flagpole was in Listowel 14 times in Kerry. It will never again be in Listowel, unfortunately. It's got too big for Listowel. And so that the FLA in Derry, where the President of Ireland came, he spoke to, I think, 12,000 people at the official opening. And I remember being in this particular venue where I was responsible for some of the competitions that were being held, and we were right here in this venue. And the excitement around the town, around the city of Derry. And I remember meeting John Hume, Lord of Mercy, the man. He was walking around the city, so happy to see Flagpole in his hometown. And that, for me, I think, was said a lot too. So,
Absolutely. And thank you. It's the reason Eamon's joined us is it's the 10th anniversary, obviously, of the FLA, but also 50 years, 50 I think, Evelyn, of the local.
Yes, we had a lovely occasion yesterday in the Cultural in Canning, celebrating 50 years since the Derry branch of Cultus was founded, and of course 10 years since Flagpole in the Hearn. And I was delighted to hear, Eileen and people like, there were so many people involved in the running of Flagpole in the Hearn in Derry, and it wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have the voluntary effort from people, because you can't buy the FLA. It just happens. It's a community festival. It's a family occasion. And you're right about the PSNI. I remember being in the Cultural in Dublin that particular occasion, and that PSNI officer gave us his mobile number, his private number, and said, "You can ring me at any time, and I'll give you an update in relation to that." Because a lot of people were concerned about coming to Derry at that time, 10 years ago. A lot of people had reservations. A lot of people came to the FLA, but didn't actually stay in Derry. I had a wonderful week in Derry, and there was no incident at all for the 8 days of the FLA, which is in itself a huge achievement, So certainly, congratulations to everybody, Garrod O'Hara, yourself, and all the committee that came together. And I was delighted yesterday to hear Garrod saying, "Look, we'll have it back," and that's good to see that. We'll have it back again. So, well done.
Here you are. You heard it from the stage. Joanna, you're in the you were at the thick of it, and in terms of the reason it worked so well was the partnership. We started out with complete blank slate. 55 cities, I think, plus have since bid over this period for the status of City of Culture. But in Derry, we secured the Turner Prize, the BBC support, the Heritage Lottery Legacy money, the Arts and Sports Councils, and the departmental budgets. I mean, that was a series of significant negotiations. Obviously led with Phil, in terms of the leap of faith. But we were going out there creating a template that other cities pick up from now and not have to maybe start at the same level. But within government, I mean, you were working across government departments. You were there on the ground at the time, but also helping us do that negotiation.
Yes, I was the woman from the ministry. And the ministry at that time was the Department for Culture, Arts and Leisure.
It used to be known crack, alcohol and laughter. In my old days.
There was no laughter.
One of my first permanent secretaries, Dr. McGinley. And also, to throw a bit of credit your way, I mean, Aiding's really was the genesis of all of this to make the bid for the city. So while we're celebrating 10 years, you know, really there was work going on for years before 2013 and lots of legacy work obviously going on afterwards. But yeah, I had the privilege of being the person who was bringing the central government money, which meant that everybody wanted to meet me, and I got lots of lovely hospitality, and it was wonderful. But the trade-off was I also then had to get everyone to do the sometimes quite bureaucratic paperwork and all of that in return for it. And my big memory was the willingness of people. You know, it's not easy to ask people to have to do business cases and post-project evaluations and claim forms and everything else and project plans, but everyone was willing to do it. And it was bananas. I mean, it really was bananas for years around it. Great crack, but bananas. But that willingness, I think, is the thing that was so memorable for me. I mean, there were events that personally, Hawfish Sector was one that I really personally enjoyed attending. There were lots of events like that just I'd never seen anything like it. I don't know if I've seen anything like it since, but people working together, as Evelyn says, the communications, and for me, it was people setting aside what could have sometimes been quite a competitive environment where people are competing for funding to just say, do you know what, we just need to make this happen. And also some of the work that was done that was under the spotlight, and Cultureland certainly takes credit for some of this work that was done with the Londonderry Bands Forum at the time, with the PUL community in the city, that resulted in marching bands marching through Waterloo Place for the first time in 40 years. You know, you just wouldn't have got that without this kind of wider piece happening around it. And that forged a relationship that goes on now across those sort of cultural quarters of the city. And I want, you could name so many people, but I want to give a shout out as well for the city centre manager, who I believe is still the city centre manager, Jim Roddy. I don't think he's here today, but Jim did so much work. And for me, he kind of represented a whole swathe of people who did work very quietly in the background that really made a difference. And that was really memorable, that, you know, the city was able to do some things that I'm not sure anybody else could have done. And it wasn't organised, it wasn't planned in a sense of a project management plan. It just happened because there was just this bigger, exciting thing happening that just opened doors for people.
Sometimes it's that common ground and unifying force. And I mean, I think for me too, it was the depth of passion people had, that they really wanted to make this. And it was, in a way, in inverted commas, an excuse. I'm looking at the countdown here. You know, an excuse maybe to do things people would want to do, but allowed them to step out of that comfort zone. I mean, Oren, you had to find bed spaces for 450,000 people, and we probably only had about 3 hotels at the time.
Yeah, I think the big story for us was how are we going to find all these beds for people, you know, because we had such a low accommodation base, and they're talking about bringing in cruise ships, but that was nearly like the challenge for the destination. I think I got a real baptism of fire when I started in my current role. We had an incendiary device that blew up at the front door of the tourist office. We then were sent to Dublin to prove that it was safe to come to Derry.
That's right.
And how we turned that around for us was a big part of the journey, and was amazing because, you know, we're a pretty new destination. Northern Ireland was a pretty new destination. Northern Ireland tourism brand was changed in 2012, Our Time, Our Place. A lot of big events were brought on. Titanic opened. We brought in the Clipper Round the World Yacht Race. The Peace Bridge had just opened in 2011. There's a lot of things happened, transitioning. The big talk was World Heritage status, you remember?
That's right.
But we pushed on towards City of Culture. We needed a catalyst. We needed something to change. So when we got to we were glad to get to 2013. And yeah, to turn around so much programming in less than just about 2 years. It was phenomenal. Our role was to be international marketing, so we had to go to the market and take the programming and sell that to tour operators, press, media. But if you don't have a program, it's very difficult. Come to City of Culture in 2013, don't know what the program's going to be, but we knew the FLA was coming, and that was a big carrot. But building that program and getting people to come was critical. The Republic of Ireland market for the FLA turned around 5% of our market coming from the south, really just family and friends. That changed that. Now we're up to 15-20% of our market is Republic of Ireland, but that's still at the same level as Americans coming to stay in the city. So there's a lot of opportunity, still a lot of legacy to develop.
No, I remember people literally throwing open their doors. But John, my memory of you is that Phil Redmond, the one thing he said to us when we got this, get your blue light services right. If you do nothing else, get your blue light services right. And first of all, I was going, what's got a blue light? I mean, my first reaction was, what's a blue light service? And then we discovered, John, thankfully, knew. And John says, I'll do that bit. And that's what it was about. People was going, right, I'll do that bit, and went off and did it. So what for you? Obviously, John, now as Chief Executive of the Council, had a baptism by fire with the rest of us. But, where we are now, John, and your memories of that, what do you...
Well, we're out of time.
I know, but I'm allowing you. I can't go out of Derry City Council of Guildhall without letting you speak.
Well, you talked about the big night in here when I was in here, jubilation. And as you say, a few days later, I was director in council at the time. Hadn't a lot to do with the bid. Knew it was going on. Una and yourself, others were leading on it. But asked the question, so what about the logistics? What about the transport and the planning and the health and safety and the management, all the technical? Who's doing that? The answer was, well, I don't know actually, but maybe you could try and pull that together with all of the agencies.
I thought you put your hand up and said...
And, I didn't quite at the time, but so there was sheer panic. If truth be told, there was sheer panic.
Yeah.
I mean, we were 2 years out. Unlike GB, councils here don't have the same range of functions. It's split right across all sorts of government departments. Transport's at here, and infrastructure's there, and planning at that time was another government department. They didn't really work that well together. There was all this issue about silo governance and that type of thing, but we had to come together. The council, I had to try and pull that together, and I see some colleagues in the room, DFC, Pauline and Ian at the time, and SIB, David, all came together and started to work in what we called the infrastructure group, if you remember, at that time. Big grouping of all sorts of agencies of government, departments of council.
And it hadn't happened before.
Hadn't happened before.
No.
And there was no accountability in any of that. I mean, we all were accountable to our own departments. Most of these organisations had their own priorities. City of Culture was just something that was going to happen. But as you said, and as everybody has said, I mean, right across the arts sector, this was happening, and right across the technical sector, if you want to call it that. That started to happen as well, where people just said, we have to get this done, we have to work together, we have to find ways to do it. And a really interesting thing that Phil said was, for the first time, drama and maths came together. Mm-hmm. So we had artists in the room trying to plan things with technicians and bureaucrats and regulatory people trying to keep it safe and trying to work out how that would happen. Plenty of very interesting meetings during all of that. But you know what? What came out of that, for me, was one of the biggest legacies that was built in City of Culture, because suddenly, right across the statutory sector, right across these individual arms of government, working with the arts sector, working with our community partners, and there was a lot of distrust in those days between, if we go right back into those early years, the community sector felt that the statutory sector wasn't supporting it adequately, didn't understand it, and vice versa. It broke down so many of those barriers. We've gone on to achieve tremendous things in this and have a fantastic future ahead because of what we built in the partnerships. The partnerships going way beyond the arts and culture.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, unfortunately, time is up because as you can see, there's such a wealth of memory and a sense of achievement here that we could go on. We could spend the whole day on this. But it is true that I'll just share one final word. I'm privileged to be on the panel for City of Culture and got to visit, you know, all. In fact, in the last all the years, I think I've seen all the cities except the cities that were in the year of City of Culture, and that is such a privilege. And one moment when you heard "Let the Rivers Run," we were coming into a hall in Wrexham, and there was a male voice choir singing "Let the Rivers Run." Well, I'm just getting goosebumps going through it because watching that film and just that sheer sense, it was unique. It was one of those John F. Kennedy type moments, where were you? And I just wish the cities coming forward, you know, you'll hear later from 3 brilliant cities this year, but to have been the original city, to have set the bar high, to have let culture and creativity sing, but most importantly, the community and the young people. And one final message, a young man called Matthew Devine from this city, I was working on entirely unrelated on a piece of embedding well-being legislation in Westminster last year. And I got talking to Matthew, who was from Derry, and me and him were the northern. I was the oldie and he was the young person. And I said to him, "What's got you interested in this, you know, in parliamentary?" He says, "When I was 8, the City of Culture was in my city. I saw what my city was, but more importantly, I saw what it could be." And that's the message I think it comes from today. So thank you, everybody in this room, for what you did and what you continue to do, and for all our panellists. We're all still here 10 years later. Please God, 2033 may we well all be the same. So thank you, everybody. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Rotha Johnson, and I'm going to be chairing this session. And I'm not going to introduce our panel because you've got all the details in the brochure. And because we're under a bit of a time clock, I think there's a big clock in front of us here when we're going to be thrown off the stage. I'm going to jump straight in. So look, it's a real pleasure to be here. 10 years since the City of Culture was held in Derry, Londonderry, Legendary, whatever you prefer to call it. And I had the privilege of being on the panel to select the city all those years ago, over 12 years ago. So we're going to pick up the theme that our colleagues have just finished off with in terms of partnerships. And none of the cities of culture, European cities of culture, UK cities of culture, can happen with partnerships at all levels, whether those are on a national government level, regional or local. And indeed, we've heard even from the last panel, the importance of voluntary groups and community groups and all that needs, all of those people who need to work together to bring to life the ambition of the City of Culture. So I want to start first of all with you, Kevin, in terms of you're on the ground in Derry, Londonderry, 10 years since the City of Culture. Partnerships are important in terms of your work, both in the Playhouse and in terms of the collaborative artwork that you do. Has much changed in the 10 years? Have we learned much in terms of partnerships and how they work?
Yes.
I was hoping for a little bit more than that.
But I think they are no easier one now than they were then or before 2013. I think, but they're more necessary now. I think what John referred to when he spoke to is that a moment came, something had to be done, people had to come together. And we're at that moment again, I think, maybe for different reasons, but partly resourcing is a challenge. Also, we're in a space where if we don't collaborate, we're not going to do a regenerative kind of approach to all of this within our planetary limits. So that's something else I think is a big motivator. I think diversity and inclusion is a huge issue still here. And so partnership and collaboration is a way to bring new ideas, new people, new perspectives, and to welcome people with different identities, I think.
And do you think, is there more of an understanding from partnerships, particularly funding partners, in terms of the impact that culture can have in society and communities?
Probably yes, but you're only moving the needle a little bit here. I think there's a long way to go. I think partnership, we're not always that good at it still. We don't resource it because it's something that needs time, energy, and effort. And what happens is that people get frayed at the edges, and then it's not resourced, so people don't build the capability to do it well. There are still bad dynamics of power across Northern Ireland, and those things are reflected here too. And so all of those issues are in the mix, but that it's a hopeful thing. We're talking about partnerships. Partnerships is a way to reimagine how things are, working together across not only the arts, but particularly across sectors, is a really powerful way to change things. And thinking about localities, localities combining with other localities is another powerful idea. These are all, if you take partnership and broaden it out to a much more kind of organic, ecological way of thinking about things, I think you're hit upon some aspect of the cultural code there, cracking it.
I was interested in what Claire McColgan said in terms of the legacy, that really legacy hadn't been planned for. But I thought that one of the most powerful issues that she mentioned was that they've had a sort of a year of culture every year since, in terms of planning. Do you think there's enough planning in this locality in terms of culture and enough input into it?
Can I be brutal? We didn't have a city of culture every year since, that's obvious. Maybe that's a really good idea. And the other thing that Claire said, that they invested heavily in the quality and excellence of it, not just in relation to artistic practice, but in people's experiences and cultural experiences. So to be honest, that's not happened. If we're honest, we had a conversation was referred to earlier in the city, which was mainly with the sector. Because as you mentioned, I sit on a co-delivery group, so that's one of the partnership things that's very positive. So the sector comes together with council and also engages with other agencies and tries to plan an arts and culture strategy for the region. But as it stands now, we can't afford to do it.
Kevin, I'm just conscious of time.
Sure.
This big clock in front of me keeps counting down. But if there was one thing, or if there was something that you would like to see happen that would help to move the agenda forward and to bring your ambition to life further, what would it be?
Just three brief things. We need a new narrative. Maybe the city culture every year is it. Second thing is we need a more integrated and coherent approach. I'll leave it at that. And the third thing I think is that I've heard a lot around value of culture, which is really important, but it's how we value culture in the sense of apportioning resources. What's the benefit it brings to socio and economic kind of factors? We talk a lot about that, but we don't ever seem to be talking about rights. And I think there's a fundamental thing that underpins all of that, it's part of our human rights. And that, once you get that, and we know that the public need it because they do it every day and they come every day, and we know that it's a public good, but we don't make that basic fundamental choice. And it has to be made all the time again. Culture has to be remade, cities of cultures have to be remade. This choice has to be probably remade every day. But we're not making it on the right basis. We're leaving that bit out and just wiggling around with value.
Thank you. Paul, could we move on to you? Obviously, both from your Future Screens role and university, and also you've a lot of experience in Europe as well as broader internationally. Any comments or any views you have in terms of where we are now as opposed to 2013? Anything we can learn from other cities?
I think the legacy thing is interesting. When we hear the word legacy, we tend to think of what happened in the past. I always try to see legacy as a nostalgia for the future, where you take the bits from the past and put it into the future in that way. Future Screens NI, for those of you who don't know it, is a UK Industrial Challenge funded research project, which basically gives awards to small companies to develop technology around the arts and the creative industries. And it does not work unless we're in partnership. I've come to call it now the Future Screens Partnership. We have 120 partners that we've worked with. Some small, some large. We have key partners, people like NI Screen, Harbour Commission, BBC, Arts Council, British Council. We have key partners that we work with. And it's only through those partnerships that we have moved things, because that allows us to work as a kind of cultural broker and to talk across different agencies. And what then happens is that two things happen. You maximise funding and you maximise the spread, because there are a number of bodies saying the same thing, and I'll come back to that in a moment. That then allows you to move on to the national stage. Through the foundation, or kind of grounding, if you like, that Future Screens was lucky to create. We work with our colleagues at Queen's University as well, as part of the partnership. Through that, we were able to bring things to the region. So, for example, we brought CoStar. CoStar is a virtual production research labs, and Northern Ireland is now one of only 4 in the UK. We were able to bring Studio Ulster as part of the City deal. And you say this and people kind of say, what? Studio Ulster is a virtual production studio in the harbour, which will be the largest virtual production studio in Europe, and at the moment the 3rd largest in the world. Now, it might be on the harbour in Belfast, but it's a regional piece, because obviously the training for that will have to happen in places like Derry and in other places. Therefore, you're partnering cities as well when you bring those kinds of things in. And we're now then moving into the international area because of those partnerships, particularly with the British Council. So one example is we're working in Tokyo to bring in experts from there into here around smart textiles and robotics. Because culture, going back to what Phil said, culture for me is everyday lived experience. And the biggest danger is if those creative industries become a bubble that doesn't touch the rest of the economy. Because you then end up what you have in San Francisco, people throwing stones at the Google bus because it's not part of their lives. I want very quickly, the second thing I think we have to do in partnerships is to start speaking a common language. That was something that Phil spoke about. I don't care whether you think you're from the cultural economy or the creative economy, but I do care when we go to talk to funders what that means, that we say the same thing. I'm a very old man. I'm doing this for 40 years. I was involved in hundreds of reports that we took to politicians, and they said, that's lovely, that's mum and apple pie, and we'll just put that on the shelf there. Thank you very much. It was only when I started saying to them, we'll make you jobs and we'll bring you in GVA. And thankfully, after 5 years, through Future Screens, I've been able to say to them, in 5 years, we have created 571 jobs for an investment of 5.2 million, and we have leveraged 131 million pounds for this region. You say that to politicians, then they're taking you to lunch. It's still the same thing we're talking about. But instead of saying to people we need funding awards, why not say we need investment? And if you give us that investment, we'll make you jobs. We'll increase the GVA. That might be through spillage. It might be through hotel rooms or whatever, but we need to start speaking a common language. Jeff Mulligan is brilliant in this. He says we're in an imaginary crisis. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means we've stopped talking about imagination as a strategy. And that's what we need to start doing, because that gives us hope. The big thing that Thatcher did was that she said there is no hope, because things can't change. It's inevitable that things are the way they are. We need to have what Slavoj Zizek calls the courage of hopelessness, and build hope into a strategy as well, which brings me to the third piece, which is you work on the infrastructure. You don't just do this as a bubble, you work on the infrastructure. You may not hear this very often from a public platform. I cannot speak highly enough for the civil servants I work with in DFE, DFC. Particularly we work with DFC, and the ones who get it really get it. We're moving into a second phase of Future Screens because of that support. The people who did it are in this room. I'm not going to embarrass them, but I need to tell you they're in this room, and I cannot speak highly enough of them. Because without them, we wouldn't have that infrastructure. You need to talk to politicians. You need to knock on doors. You need to make it part of the infrastructure, because that's what takes it forward. And there's two really crucial things about that. We need to build that hope into what we do, and not be hopeless, but to have the courage of hopelessness to take them on and say this is not happening. And the other thing I'm convinced of, it sounds slightly romantic, doing it a long time. If we continue to work with strategy, passion, and the correct aims, the future reaches back actually and pulls us into the future. We don't need to do anything. Because if you have the structures right, you have the passion right, and you have the strategy right, it will reach back and pull us forward. That's what partnerships are for.
Well, I think very powerful, Paul, absolutely. And that's really about the coalition of ambition and focus. So I'm going to move to you, Carly, from an Arts Council perspective. So you've obviously you're dealing with partnerships day in, day out. Any learnings from your perspective from City of Culture 2013, what it means in terms of partnerships going forward?
Yes, certainly. So I think just from the previous panel, it was clear that was a catalyst for that collaboration. We can see the impacts, the positive impacts across the sector. So I think Joanna mentioned that it was prior to 2013, a lot of this work was ongoing as well. So there's no doubt that that brought positive impacts. And I suppose there was other things from, if you think over the 10 years, Kevin mentioned it, the co-delivery group, and I think that restructuring of local authorities was an opportunity with the 11 super councils and really thinking about arts in terms of that local policy and making sure artists were involved in decisions and things. So I think that's been a positive collaboration as well that's come out of it. But of course, as one set of partnerships close, there's others to think about and what needs to happen in the future. And I think there's some really good examples. I think your original question was, what is it more easy to achieve it now from 2013? And I think it's a yes and a no. I think Kevin's touched upon it. Partnerships take time, they take resource and will, but I think from what Paul was saying, if there's a will there and ambition and shared goals and shared values and people wanting to come together and trying to keep a positive mindset on it, I think you really can, because on the other side, when resources are low, per value for money, you need to come together and you need to pool resources, not just money, but your networks and your expertise and things. So obviously 10 years on, resourcing is much less as well than what it was. So yeah, it's just thinking through how do we sell that. And I think Claire had said it, the public get it. We've just released a survey there. General public absolutely agree that there should be public investment in arts. They would vote for a politician that supports investment in the arts. So it's not the public, I think, that we need to convince.
And obviously, I mean, your budget, I think most of us in this room will be aware, has been under pressure for many years. So the issue in terms of sort of, I suppose, raising public awareness of that is important, and you've already addressed that. But actually focusing on partnerships on specific needs in communities. So, for example, you know, the Derry City of Culture or Derry Londonderry City of Culture isn't the same as any other city of culture. It's focusing on the specific, if you want, strengths or needs in a community. Are you able to do that in the Arts Council, actually, to work in partners on specific localised issues?
Yes, I mean, I could talk for hours on the existing partnerships that there are, particularly artists that are working in many different ways right across government right now, in education and health and all of the different outcomes that brings. And it brings outcomes for the artists. Obviously, it creates opportunities for them, for people, because they're getting to experience opportunities, societies, bringing people together, and the institutions involved too. So DFC, the Arts Council, Derry and Strabane City Council and other councils are learning as well and helping us meet our strategic objectives. So yes, I think you have to think creatively when resources are tight, but obviously if there was more, you would be able to do more. But yeah, that's okay.
Thank you. Emer, turning to you from the Department for Communities, and you're getting praise indeed for your colleagues and for the department and for DFE in terms of its understanding of the needs of culture and arts in Northern Ireland. I mean, obviously, I know you're just recently appointed into this post, so I'm not going to ask you to turn back the clock to 2013. But really, in terms of the dealings or the briefing you've had from colleagues, do you think much has changed in terms of partnerships and the approach that your department has with partners, whether it's in the voluntary sector or not, since that period of time?
Thank you, Rotha, and yes, to pay tribute to the colleagues that are here today. I won't take your glory winning you in post. Just to reflect on the question, I think what resonated with me most was Sir Phil's comments at the start on the AI. And traditionally, a civil servant approaching a strategy, that resonated with me. I understood all the things the AI result was saying. Seemed like a good answer. I said, that's very good. I like that. But from working with colleagues, from seeing the approach, we're not taking that approach to a new strategy in Northern Ireland for culture, arts and heritage. We have, and thanks to Rotha, who's led a really expert group probably people in this room and across the region, experts from outside the region, international experts, to come up with a number of actions and recommendations to invest in creative delivery, and has presented that to the department. And we will use that now to shape our strategy, which is really a rationale, a framework that will allow all our partners to see how they can contribute. What central government has to do, and we do have a statutory duty here, we do need to step up. It needs funding. No one's saying that here today, but we don't have enough. We don't have enough money. So how do we work with partners everywhere to get more funding? Be that partners in the south of Ireland, EU, internationally. We all know, and thanks to Paul and his comments, FDI, foreign direct investment, will come to an area that's attractive, is culturally aware, has something more to offer and give. So there's so many more benefits than just the AI answer on what is culture, arts and heritage for a group in society. And I think the partnership working is key to that. There is no point in government sitting at the centre. In Belfast, up in Stormont, I'm from Derry, so I probably shouldn't be too critical of Belfast either, but we can't sit in the centre and look out. We need people to come in, tell us what we need to do, work with us and help deliver. And it's that cross-departmental approach that will give us that buy-in that we need and maximise whatever pots of money there is. Let's bring it together. Let's look at it in a coherent voice, with a coherent way, and drive the change we need to see and help build what we have. Because, I say I'm from the city. I was a partner, or not partner. I turned up at the events and enjoyed them. They were great. But I did feel that rise of the shoulders that you talked about at that time in the city. And the legacy and what we've built from then is here. And we just need to keep that growth going and build on it. So partnerships are key.
Okay, when I turn my mind back to the presentation that Derry Londonderry made in Liverpool, and Phil was chairing the panel, it was quite a moment when the Derry team came in, and that actually they had more people on the panel than they were allowed to have. So in order to get round that, actually people were coming in and out of the room, replacing, so I think it was maybe 12 people they were allowed, so one person would go out and come and fill the seat. But when the film was played, when the trailer was played, and the lights were dimmed, I can tell you that there was silence in that room, and there were definitely tears by more than one person because of the real feeling, the community spirit. We had politicians were on that panel, community representatives, the council, artists who were there. So there was a sense that there was a collective vibrancy and will for this to happen in the city. I suppose really what I want to move on to as we draw this to a close is how can we help transfer that to other parts of Northern Ireland, because that brought together the council with the department locally and with national government from Westminster in terms of funding. Is there an opportunity to work more collectively with other councils? We have the regional city deals now, so we've got 4 areas in Northern Ireland that we've brought together is there something that can be done further is it something that the department can consider further going forward?
Absolutely. And I think the structures that we have in place now, the trust that we have with partners, and I think that was mentioned before earlier as well. I think, John, you mentioned that. That is there now. It is building. It is built. We need to build on that. The strategy, when it comes forward for culture, arts and heritage, will have that name. It will be for that sector, but it will be cross-departmental. It will look to all the ALBs. It will work to local government. It will look to other departments. As I say, it cannot be owned by one small section or one group. It's for us all.
Well, look, unfortunately, we run out of time about 5 minutes ago, so I am afraid I'm going to have to draw this to a close. But look, we look forward to the rest of the sessions. I think we're going to hear just shortly after. We're going to have a break now for 5 minutes, and then hear from prospective bidders for the next City of Culture and just the journey that they're going through. So, look, 5-minute break, and then I think we're all back in the room again. Thank you.
Right. This is one of those theatre announcements. We have 1-2 minutes to go. If you all kindly take your seats, please. Round up the stragglers outside. Even if they don't want to come in. Ask Claire and Harry to sit down. Let's see if we can move on. What? Yeah. Right. Who's supposed to be up here with me now? Liam. Nice. Jump on, yeah. All sit as far as you can. Real good? Right. Yeah. Okay, one housekeeping announcement. We're going to try and squeeze in some Q&A at the end. No difficult questions about whether Everton will survive relegation again. But if you want to write out on a postcard and give it to anybody wearing a light blue lanyard like that one over there, we can collect them and do that at the end. So now we're on to perspectives from the bidding cities, Wrexham and Armagh, and the newest awarded Bradford. Right? Oh. Am I going to sit here by myself? Right. I'm going to ask the question I always asked when I went round each of the cities on the visits was whose idea it was. And I suppose in today's context, that is, whose was the leap of faith? And I used to say when I'm visiting the city, I really want to know who's going to get the statue put up. So with Wrexham.
Wrexham.
Who had this marvellous idea to bid?
Chief Executive of the local authority,
Yep.
which isn't me. He's gutted not to be here. And I've never, we were talking about this player earlier, weren't we? There are many chief executives of local authorities who support culture. I've never known anybody so proactive in it, in his work as Ian is.
Yeah.
And in the broadest sense of culture. And he came in 6 months before the pandemic, and still he was the one that pushed for it.
Yeah. And then the other one I want to ask you specifically for Wrexham, who put the sign up on the hill, the Hollywood sign of Wrexham?
It wasn't the Hollywood boys. It wasn't, no. There's still rumours. Nobody really knows.
No.
Nobody really knows. It's like Banksy, staying mysterious.
Yeah, because the one, we mentioned it this morning, and one of the values of the competition is just taking part. And I think that putting that up on the side of the mountain really projected Wrexham, didn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's a huge energy around Wrexham because of the Hollywood takeover of the football club, without a doubt. But that remains to be seen how much of a bubble that is and how real that is. We certainly didn't have. We wanted to win. That's why we entered, and we expected it until the better team won. But actually, what we had no idea of was the value of the journey rather than the destination.
Right.
I mean, I all of the things that everybody's mentioned, whether it's partnership work, whether it's politicians cross-party agreeing, and it's challenging in Wrexham, usually a split council to make decisions. Mostly, it was that we understood more about ourselves as a community, as a set of people, than we did before. For example, somebody had a stat sat in the council that nobody ever talked about. We didn't realise that we had 72 languages spoken in our county borough. We'd never talked to the world about that. We'd never realised it about ourselves. We'd never spoken to each other about it. And there were a million and one things that we found out ourselves about that. And of course, confidence, ambition. And the council have already, because of the journey, committed more money to culture than they ever did. And given the austerity that is going on, the efficiencies that they need to make, that's quite something. And they've already committed to bid again. without the criteria even being set, or what it means. And again, that's quite bold, isn't it, for politicians to make that statement so far out. So it's been endlessly positive.
So to give you a challenge, we should ask for at least 82 languages spoken in your region.
Done.
Okay. What I was really taken by when we were looking at the bid was this concept of play that you had, and sort of like get people engaged in all ages in playing to bring communities together to play and all that. Could you just give us a little bit about that and how that's actually still, is that still moving forward? Is that?
It is, and actually, I mean, there certainly wasn't a cultural strategy for Wrexham. There were a few documents previously, and there were some very, very good strands of work and narrative. The journey has definitely helped kind of form that, and one of them was aiming to be a capital of play. And essentially that means in any way you can imagine, and probably in lots of ways that you can't imagine, how do you encourage people to play in their lives? I mean, you were talking about how we encourage young children to play and build dens and all of that, and then we lose that as we get older. So really, really encouraging adults, how do you play in the workplace? How do you play as you're going shopping down the high street? How do you go and interact with people from a different generation and play together? And what does that unlock? And actually, and I should say this because there is a number of Welsh Government here, but Welsh Government have a new curriculum that started this year. My 12-year-old daughter is the first year going through it. And there is very, very clearly more play and more culture expected of every school and every educational curriculum for young people in Wales. And it's really trying to harness that. And if I'm really honest, I don't know what that means. I don't know what it looks like, is the example. And you go back to the leap of faith, it's that. It's a gut instinct of going, if we make Wrexham the capital of play, that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how we monitor it. I don't know what it looks like, but I know it's going to be good.
Yeah. This might be a bit of an unfair question to you because I know you stepped in because Ian couldn't be here today. But I was kind of sticking with that concept of play. I mean, one of the things you took us to see on the visit was the venture playground, right? Which I thought was fantastic because that went from being like some lunatic bloke setting up this really mad playground for kids to actually being a really valuable resource within the community, and antisocial behaviour dropping, crime dropping and things like that. Have those kind of stats been quantified? And are they sort of in the thinking there? Because I'm thinking ahead to our economists later, right? That if you put 4 adventure playgrounds in, would it reduce antisocial behaviour by a factor of 4?
In all honesty, no. No. And actually that's one of our big journeys of learning, because the bid process absolutely did all of the things and more that I've mentioned already.
Yeah.
But it's also highlighted how do we actually understand what we're trying to achieve? How do we capture that? And that playground, I mean, I know there's one stat that there's a chair of a panel that got very excited about going to that and going on the swings and setting on fire, things on fire with the kids.
Yeah.
So no, but I think it's given the mechanism now for the discussion with the people that can invest and make the decisions in the county borough to progress those narratives and those programmes.
Yeah. What Liam's referring to there, I was so taken by this adventure playground that I went down the zip wire. And when I got down there, some of the kids said, is he in Harry Potter? It turned out they thought I was Dumbledore. Right, Amar, I mean, you bid, you were unsuccessful, and part of the questions are there because we got to the shortlist and the impact and everything. What did Amar get out of the process except from a bit of trauma?
No, there was a fair bit of trauma, and I think Sir Phil Redmond got replaced with something else after. And I suppose when we originally, the concept probably we did a slight business case, but it was a leap of faith. Again, I think it was probably we were a place there was a lack of confidence. We had been a significant place many centuries before, and I was trying to find our feet again for the future. But one of the things that Una from Derry said to me was, like, if this isn't led from the chief executive level, you're beat. And I think that was one of the lessons I took from the amazing feedback we had from the Derry team. I would acknowledge that. And so our chief executive led it and owned it and allowed me to kick in any door we needed to kick in. And I would have to say again, it was mentioned, sorry, I'm doing my political bit, but the support from the likes of DFC, Gerard Murray, I don't think is here today, but DFC were phenomenal. So we got that. There was a collegiate sort of piece, political support, which if anyone's from Northern Ireland or Ireland, you know that doesn't ordinarily happen. It's the one project we've ever worked on that brought all sides of the political sphere together. People who would never have knocked your door about anything culture related were coming saying anything we can do, and that went into Stormont, it went into Westminster. Column Eastwood actually was one of our events, which was quite a bit of a coup as well from Derry. But no, so what we got from it was it brought community, it brought business, it brought arts, it brought everyone together behind a shared vision. And I think as a place, we were a new construct as a council. So we were the oldest city in Ireland. We were a new town, which we played on because you're from a new town, and Banbridge, which was a market town. And that was one of our challenges, bringing that together as a cohort. It was a political construct, but through culture, we brought it together, and it was everywhere. So I don't actually feel like we lost, because if you weren't into the house and seats in Craigavon into the cathedrals in Armagh, it was being talked about and it was real. And one of the things I would say too, it gave us a confidence. We reached out to diaspora. So Paul Muldoon, who's a poet from our area, or Seamus McGarvey, who was a cinematographer who has won Oscars twice. We reached out to them and they said, yes, of course. And again, with the BBC, I would acknowledge Peter Johnson, who was the director at that time locally in BBC, said, we reached out to him and you're thinking, well, he's going to think, why Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon? And he said, of course. And then going over to Coventry and having that session in Coventry, it was, and then we lost. But it was really inspiring, and we thought, no, elbows out, we're where we belong. So what it's done since, and I'm conscious of time, obviously the programme costs and all that are difficult. We had an amazing programme, and we got, even to be on a call with you and Claire, and getting feedback on our programme was really creative and good. And we had sold that concept of those three places together, and was really inspiring. What we've done, the council has kind of taken this document, and we're working with communities. It was whenever Levelling Up came up, we bid for Levelling Up on our cultural projects. Again, working with DFC, our deal project is our big city deal project. So culture, this process has set the parameters for the next 10 years for our place. So phenomenally good. And if anyone else is in the room is thinking of bidding for it, not to underestimate how difficult it was. It was really arduous. It was really, there's so many strands to it, but it was amazing. And just to be in, and one of the legacies, if I may, we're working with a number of the UK cities who we call them the silver cities as opposed to the losing cities. So with Derby, with Southampton, Wrexham's not there yet, but there's always an open door. But also with Galway. Galway were an amazing supporter, as were Derry. Like, if I can just say to Una and John, the support from Derry was phenomenal. And if I can say too, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. I was in university in this city and finished in 1999. I think you need to collectively clap yourself on the back. This is a new city. I would feel slightly emotional about it too. I think it's a city transformed, and I know there's issues now on funding and everything, but you have got to a point. It's just, and you are our inspiration for why we bid. That is fair to say. So, and the legacy is that outward-looking piece. And when we didn't get through, Galway were an amazing help. The lady from Galway, who's the chair of the chief executive of the culture company, phoned with an expletive-laden call. Whatever did you not get through? We're going to work with you. So now we have a proper program with Galway, a shared island bid that is about artist exchange, and that's going to create a legacy too. So, thanks for indulging me.
Well, let's leave the silver cities behind then, and we're going to Bradford, engineers. I mean, you're successful now, so and people are coming. You're heading. It's on the horizon. What about there'd be a huge level of anticipation within the city? How are you thinking and managing what we in the media call the disappointment anticipation, the disappointments.
I think that image says a lot. I wake up at 4 a.m. every night, and that is what I wake up to in my mind's eye. When we were bidding City of Culture, internally, I was encouraging everybody to say when. Externally, we were saying if. We bid because of those young people. I was saying earlier, I think to Liam, we are big, we're city and district, we're young, rural and urban. For those who don't know, we have city council, town councils, village councils, 67% rural, 542,000 is our population, and a quarter of that is these guys. But this is the anticipation and expectation that we're delivering to. Really thinking about partnership working, really thinking about everyone who's working across the district, who's already delivering, and how we're going to be working with them and how we are starting to work with them. And also that it's not just us by ourselves. It's actually working with our communities, with our young people, with who's there, and everybody who wants to come and play and work with us. So we're not just on our own delivering this. And it was brilliant to hear both your journeys, what you've been doing now post, and the relationships you've got with other cities of culture. I don't say losers, I say bidders and winners. So kind of absolutely coming from that perspective. And also you talked about data-driven calculated risk. I call it human-driven calculated risk.
Okay. It's slightly tricky for me to ask you questions, actually, because we've got to come back and do our midterm report on you, haven't we? I don't want to give anything away. But one of the things I did want to just task you on a little bit is the fact that, or ask you how you're coping with it, is that Bradford is actually the biggest city that we've awarded to. I mean, Derry was 140,000, I think, at the time, Hull 240, Coventry 380, 540. Yeah. So that level of anti-disappointment, and people are not going to, no matter what you offer, there's always going to be some voices that are going to say, like, not many for me, And when we did Liverpool, by September, someone would come up to me and say, oh, there's nothing in this for me. I said, well, you've either been away or you haven't been listening, one of the two. So have you thought about that, how it might be an exponential challenge for Bradford in this? And, well, you've got to be, yeah.
I think you touched on the issue is we're 144 square miles. You've got some really challenging areas of Bradford and you've got some less challenging Bradford. You spend a day talking about some really hard-hitting issues in that district of Bradford, and you go out in the evening to a more rural area and we talk about sheep and land art and things like that. So it's quite a city of absolute kind of contrast. So you're right. We need to develop a program and deliver a program that does have a wide appeal for different people, probably at different times and at different times of the year as well. So it's a really complex thing. But our kind of, every time we do something publicly, we've really sort of pushed on kind of open calls to get investment across the communities and across the arts groups. So every time we do something, we think might get like a dozen responses, and it's like 132 for some small art commissions. We've just done a REBA, a kind of international design project for a new sort of pavilion that will take culture across the district for those that are just not interested or can't access culture as well, because it is a big district as well. It takes a long time to get across the district as well. And we had over 50 applications for that. And we've just, again, taking a lot of the learnings from all the cities of cultures in the past. We've just done, I think we're the first one to do an open kind of capital call about getting the city ready, getting the district ready for the culture and getting buildings and venues accessible as well. And we had 82 applications for £15.5 million. as well, which is a incredible opportunity. But and there's some really big basic things, putting toilets in a visitor centre, which you would have thought would be a fairly standard thing, but creating new kind of galleries. So I suppose it goes back to a point we're trying to spread across the district, spread across the different cultures, the faith groups, the community groups as well, but also bring something big and magical. And this is what's been so lovely about today, is hearing and watching that video just now. I just want to watch it again. Was just, just looking at the big profile stuff and the very small and kind of local as well. I think that's, for me, is how it will work.
It goes back to what Claire said earlier. The big stuff matters. Community stuff matters, because a crowd is made up of individuals. And so those individuals and how they approach it matters. They don't have to like it. They can absolutely hate it, but I'd like a reaction, because that means they've engaged. If there's no reaction, there's no engagement. And, picking up on what Dan said about what we're trying to do with venues, that is also about giving those communities the confidence that they can access their own voices and what they want to do in response to City of Culture. And that relationship between artists and community, that's in the DNA of Bradford. I mean, Welfare State, Bradford, we've done large-scale outdoor work, Bradford. When I was a kid, we did what we used to call it community arts, didn't we? And then I always say we grew up and we wrote PhDs, and now it's co-creation and socially engaged practice. But actually, it's about putting creativity and imagination at the heart of a City of Culture. You cannot deliver it without that. And that imagination is about recognising, yes, the visitor centre needs toilets. 2, actually, there's a really fantastic young woman who's a beat poet and has stood up and done a piece of work. Dan keeps thinking it's the Asda car park. It's actually the Morrison's car park. But actually, what's her next journey?
Right. You're not allowed to answer this question because you'll be challenged on this when we come. Having taken part now in the thing and looking back, on evaluation, if you evaluated what you did and what it brought, do you think if you changed the thinking or opinion on how and what you would evaluate?
We haven't done evaluation in The Economist baseline look at it. We've definitely evaluated on how we went about presenting ourselves, who was representing us, how many artists were involved. If I'm really honest with our bid, it wasn't as artist-led as it, as culturally led as it could have. And it's definitely forming some. I tell you what, the most useful thing about all of the evaluation that was available beforehand wasn't the numbers, it wasn't the stats, it was none of that. It was the contact time, like today really, the contact time with people who have lived delivering a City of Culture, and the more of that we can get, actually, the more useful the learning can be put in place for future bids and future delivering. I'd have more on that, and that kind of PERDA type thing with the team that are delivering at the time. Try and break that down as much as possible would be my ask.
Touch evaluation, part of our consideration at this stage was, would we bid again? So that's sort of building that sort of understanding up to that point. We've restructured within council, our department, we've created new posts to help us do a bit more of that in terms of the proper community engagement. We've been very venue driven, and we have changed our approach in that regard. But again, it's a wee bit finger in the air. It's not the Department for Economic piece, but we've done a number of schemes since, and there has been a more robust evaluation process behind it. Jill and I were talking on the way coming up the road about some of the evaluations we're doing, and F.E. McWilliam Gallery is one of the projects we got levelling up for, and was one of our key venues. And again, we're building evaluation in, as I think you said earlier, just from at now through to the other end, and so that we can stand in front of DFE and say, this has delivered a meaningful return on investment, both economic as well as social.
Great. Right. I think we're at zero. We've got to stop. It's a shame. But I know everybody's desperate now to get on to the evaluation of The Economists. So if we can thank you all, that's great. There will, of course, be a session at the end when you can ask all those burning questions that are being written down on the postcards. Right, there we go.
Finally get to it, Phil. Finally get to it.
Finally get to it, yeah. And again, I just reminded everybody of that thing I said when I was talking to Claire, is that coming from my background and in media, everything I did was kind of, one hand was about the idea, but the other idea was always driven by the data, and the demographics, because in a sense, you have to sell to the broadcaster, you have to know your market, you have to know what the return is. So I'm kind of interested in how we sort of translate that kind of thinking into culture. Jonathan, I'll come to you first, because you talk about a research-led approach.
Well, I thought, seeing it's evaluation, we should start with some numbers, Phil. So we should remember we're here in Derry, where it all began, and we're celebrating this place, and we have other places here. But we should remember that in total, 71 places across the 4 nations have put in an expression of interest for the programme, and 44 of them have submitted full bids, and 17 of them have been shortlisted. And you've heard how the bidding process itself has brought, fantastic value to Armagh and to Wrexham. And 4 of those shortlisted cities are now UNESCO Cities of Culture. So I think it's important to think of the programme as a whole, and for evaluation to think about the programme as a whole. So what is it that we can learn from a city of culture that can be passed on, and how over time, over 10 years, do we bring that knowledge and learning together so that there is always a sense of progression from one city to the next? I mean, there is that expectation, which unfortunately, not in Bradford's case, but unfortunately comes out as we're going to be bigger and better than anybody else, rather than we're standing on the shoulders of the previous giant and we will point the way forward. So for me, part of the importance of evaluation is that it's honest, that it's comparable, that it's consistent, and it's dedicated to a programme which wants to be progressive. And I think the question we don't ask is what are all these events for? Not just the Cities of Culture, but the other major events, Eurovision, Commonwealth Games. We're very good. The 4 nations very good at doing events, but where are we headed? What's the national ambition? What is it that Bradford's aiming towards, contributing to on a bigger scale? So I think the challenges of evaluation are around that, really. What would we need to put in place so that we could have this sense of progression? We could have this sense that these cities are contributing to something that's common. And it feels like we're going to not have to, but we should move to thinking about what are the shared national outcomes for these events. And we know, if you look across all of the events, there's civic pride, there's health and well-being, there's increasing confidence, it wouldn't be that difficult to agree on. And then say, all right, well, if that's the case, how are we going to measure that? How are we going to know? And I think until we do that, and how can we have fair metrics that everybody can share so that we're all talking the same language? And how can we get away from that bigger and better, as I said, and start to see it as progressive? So I think that's really what feels important to me. But also, over these 10 years, the landscape has shifted. And, as you know, through looking at the various cities and how it's evolved, we have a better understanding now that the social value of a city of culture is of at least equal value to the economic value. We have a sense of trying to balance the desire to bring people to our place, but also to improve the quality of life and place for those people who live here. We have an understanding that we need to balance those big wow moments with deeper engagement with communities over time, particularly those who've been sold and hired. So these changes in what we expect and what we understand the value of culture to be in a city of culture all then put challenges in place. How do you measure social value over time? If people are still smiling in 5 years' time, can you attribute that to a city of culture? And what are the ways in which we can value that social value? And just finally, if you look at all of the shortlisted cities and all the cities that won, there are common features of legacy success. They all have stronger cultural sectors. They all have stronger cultural infrastructure and public realm. They're all better connected nationally, internationally. Lisa McGee, Derry Girls. They are all embedded in wider policies, health, education, transport, housing. Those cities think through culture. They plan through culture, and they make culture part of the broader offer to people. And I think those are all measures, and they all have cultural strategies that are owned by the committee. So I think we're beginning to evolve ways in which we can measure over time. Is culture still embedded in Coventry's thinking and planning? Is housing using creatives to resolve some of its problems? So that'd be some random answers to your question.
It's partly that thing, because I think what we've been listening to today and talking about is actually leaps of faith rather than hard data-driven things. So we're looking towards 2029 now. Have we been evaluating the right things?
I think one answer to that is that we need to be realistic about what an evaluation can evaluate. An evaluation report is not going to capture the full story, glory, and value of a city culture. It will be numbers led. These are increasing amounts of money that are invested in programs, and of course there needs to be accountability. Of course you need to be able to justify that money is being well spent, and that will tend towards numbers. What you won't get is that which is most important locally. And that's the stories of how the year was experienced differently by different people at different times in different places. The real value of it. You have to come to Derry, as we've done, and walk the streets and feel that it's a different city. How you capture that and how you report that and how you make that of national significance. It's the problem with the local news. And how does the local news become national news? I think it's
no national framework, but something that allows a local template to develop for the valuation for that specific place at that specific time. I come across to you now, because that's one of the things you wrestle with, isn't it? It's like how the different constituencies or different partners, their different expectations of.
I suppose we were lucky in that we carried a citizen survey in 2009 as part of the regeneration process. Without knowing it, we had something of a baseline. Not all the questions were there, they're not all answered, but it was a very good reference point. We replicated that in 2012 with extra questions. That was 1,000 people being surveyed across the city. It was very robust. There were qualitative questions in it, and that enabled us then, when the year was over, to begin that process again. But I suppose what I would say is that there's a pressure by funders and others to report very, very quickly. Get it done, hit the numbers. We can make a press release where my minister can say something that it was a success. The transformational change takes much, much longer, much harder to, but it's probably more important in the longer term. One of the things that we see here in terms of the greenways and shared space is active travel, more people out and about. The health outcomes of that for the city are massive, and that's something we can look at. The other issue, the challenge you face is the counterfactual, which is what would it have been like if we hadn't done this? That's always a very, very difficult thing. You can look at growth rates elsewhere, you can do things, but each individual city has its own characteristics. The other benefit we had was Queen's University, then with Dr. Phil Redmond, who's here today, and did a piece of work with the school centre, which is, again, fantastically useful in terms of the experience of those young people during the year, and reinforced a lot of what we believed to be the case. But that in itself was a useful document. So when people said things like, it missed or whatever, you could say, that's not what we're hearing from the residents of the city, the young people. And the challenge in reaching out to the neighbourhoods, which was there from the very, very start, and which we addressed, I would say my expectations were exceeded in terms of the benefits that accrued to neighbourhoods, more deprived areas, because we didn't believe that could happen in such a short period of time. The short running in itself leads to issues. The audience development work hasn't been done, particularly in the neighbourhoods. And that's the instant reaction, but the reaction from people is this is a waste of money. It could be used in something else. There's always that thing with economists, I suppose. When someone says, we'll get the economists to look at it, there's always a dread. Because it's always, why are you doing this? And it's a negative perception. That needs to change in terms of the qualitative work that you can do. All this methodology is available, but it's not applied because no one's looking for it. And I think if we went out today and asked the same questions, there were very, very positive feedback from right across the city in many, very ways. The other benefit of the whole year, which we haven't quantified, is the accelerated economic development that occurred, just getting the infrastructure in place, which we're forced to do. That brings money to bear that you wouldn't have seen for a longer period of time. The other thing I want to say is that you have to look at the context of all of this. We were just coming out, when we won the bid, we're coming out of a recession. So then we hit Brexit, and then we hit COVID. When you look at where we are, you can see how much we've achieved with all, back to counterfactual, what would the city look like if we hadn't had that? So it's been very, very effective, I think, for us. And the work we've done continues with Philip Bullen. We have a PhD researcher and working with us at the minute around the legacy. And that work will continue on. But that's very much long term. It's probably the case that the only people who can do this are academics, because the only people around long enough. A lot of the people involved in these projects are long gone by the time the longer term impacts come about.
Yeah. It's a bit like the, when I lobbied a long, long time to make the project a permanent feature of the government calendar. Finally, it was announced in Coventry that it was a permanent feature of the government calendar. And I said to everybody, this is great now, because that means it's part of the calendar, it'll be there, better access to government, might be better funding, things like that. Downside is, it's part of the government machine now, so you have to, everything else that comes with it, and with it comes evaluation, doesn't it? And the thing about evaluation is that it's always there, the stats. Stats are there, there's lies, statistics, and damn lies, isn't it? But unfortunately, the data is always there to be read.
They DCMS let the Economist out of the building, which was actually one of the reasons I came back to DCMS, is to have that. I was very clear that I wanted to go out and talk to people, because we can't do a lot of this in isolation. Which is also why City of Culture is so important, because it's not just a cultural and creative incubation and ideas, it's actually research, data science, incubation, and actually it brings a lot of people together, and we learn from each city how to improve and get better. And I think that's one of the things that's really changed in the last, well, actually since Liverpool, actually, that we've progressed and learned from each other slowly and improved those methodologies. But what is a good economic evaluation? So I want to answer that in two ways. One is what people think an economic evaluation is, and what we think as economists, or definitely people like myself, think a proper economic evaluation. So as we heard earlier from one of the panels, that we see these big GVA numbers, economic contribution studies, the classic thing we think economists are interested in, and we are, and those are great, and they do tell a story, and some people are very kind of taken by them. But then the next question is, what are they actually telling us? And that's often, this is what worked, and that's the extra thing that we're looking at as well. Want to understand more about. The second thing on those is, it then goes to robustness, and we have to deal with issues with questions like, does it have a counterfactual? Is it before and after? What's the additionality impact? Does it just actually, would people have just spent this money anyway? And those are things we deal with. And there was a study in 2015 by the What Works Centre for Cultural, What Works for Local Economic Growth, which came out and said culture has no local economic impact. And actually, if you read it, it actually just says there aren't enough good studies, right? And so I think one of the things is actually trying to move that up to a certain level to actually say equivocally there's a causal impact. And actually, it's a great study by, I think, Stephen Roper on Derry Londonderry in 2019 that actually said some of these impacts, the economic impacts, were persistent and long-lasting, which is a really powerful argument, and that's when we start getting into legacy. So, first question is, yes, do your GVA, do your jobs impact. But as Jonathan said, that's really only half the story. And a lot of the work that my team does isn't actually trying to do that work, because if you've got the data, it's actually fairly easy to do. There's many consultancies that do this. The hard bit is actually trying to equivalize the social and cultural impact at the same level as GVA. So we've got a specific program which we launched 2 years ago, although it's actually been going on in the department for much longer than that. It's actually trying to monetize or put a value on the social and cultural impacts in the same way they do in health, the same way they do in the environment sector. So you don't just talk about the actual GDP impact, which is great, but we as a sector, we're in a really privileged position that we can actually say, well, we can do that, and we can actually do all the social impact as well. That's going to take some time, though. So when we talk about economic impact assessments, we look at the social and the economic together. The trick for us as economists is then trying to equivalize them into pounds and pence. However, before we do that, we actually have to have the evidence that actually says A leads to B, i.e. this investment leads to a social impact. And that, I think, is where you can't just talk to economists. We're not as great as everyone seems to think we are. We're not. In fact, there was something someone told me once: whenever put an economist in charge of an evaluation, because you'll just get the answer that you want to get. So actually you need to bring your social researchers, your arts and humanities people. You have to take a very multidisciplinary role. And one of the big areas which I think has happened in the last 10, 12 years is just obviously the need for data scientists. And they're very hard to get, by the way. I'm sure, I know Bradford know, they're expensive, they're in demand. So trying to get them is one thing. And then two is having access to data. Getting access to data is very difficult. Either it's held by a commercial company, or we have it in government and we can't always share it. So those are the challenges, I think, in using big data. So when we think about economic impacts, I know economists thought to think about GVA, but actually it's much broader than that now. And I know we in DCMS, when we do our business cases, we take the whole lot in and make our case on the whole area of impact. So that's what I think. The myth of economists only being interested in GDP is kind of an old one. Yeah. And I think the work the ONS have done going beyond GDP shows that massive impact that our sectors have, which is also important because people look at wage quite a lot. And if you're in a sector with low wage, does that mean you're not valuable? Of course it doesn't. We pay nurses, unfortunately, a low wage, and they have massive social impact that goes beyond productivity and GDP. And it's not always why we fund it. So I think that's why we need to bring in those other social impacts and cultural impacts. Now, the problem is you have to define them. And we've got, as you know, in our evaluations, we try to hit every outcome possible. And that's why I think working on a more broader scope of like, these are the outcomes we think City of Culture can deliver, and focus on those and push forward the evidence in those areas is going to be quite important.
Yeah. Where are you on this concept of social value? How are we quantifying social value now?
So we've actually just commissioned a study. We haven't announced who's won it yet, which is looking at the health and wellbeing impact. So you know, there's a huge amount. Let's say from 10 years ago to now, the amount of evidence that culture has an impact on health is phenomenal. Work by WHO, UCL, specifically Daisy Fancourt, it is phenomenal in other universities as well. So what we're going to do is take that evidence and now try to put that in the same language as Department of Health. Use the same monetization, whether it's QALYs or whether it's savings to GPs and stuff like that. So that's one area of social impact. So when we go through each one, so the other one we're interested in is reduction in antisocial behaviour, which we've talked about. And there's not a great evidence base for that, but we know it happens because you've told me in Liverpool. And so we're going to look at that as well. So there's all these social impacts which are important, but it's not just about those, which some people call instrumental. We also need to package up what we call the kind of emotional, the inspiration, the creativity, and work out how we put that on paper as well and value that. And that's the hard bit. And that's the USP of our sectors that no other sector can do. You can invest in a car factory, but you're not going to get those benefits. Yeah. You get some of the social benefits because people have jobs, and you have, but those are very special benefits. And you saw the video today. You know, very few people can show a 5-minute video and get a tingle on the back of your neck. Our problem is that economists is how do you put that as a number and then put a value on it.
And actually, one of the things I know you talk about is the soft things about the reputational of the city, you know, the reputational place. Now, it's interesting in the public sector we talk about them as being soft reputation, things like that. But actually, in commercial world, these are very hard things. Right? And back in my day, I've spent hundreds of thousands of pounds defending our reputation because that's critical. So again, how do we value?
Can you look at what the impacts are? Causation is always an issue, but trying to quantify it, I don't think you always have to quantify it in monetary amounts. So we look at something like the School of Medicine, which is now come here. You know, the School of Medicine, which we never had before. Certainly part of the argument for that, part of the case for that, and part of the attractiveness of the city was around who are they? Well, they had the UK City of Culture inaugural in 2013. So there's something, there's culture there, and that's increasingly for students and others. The cultural experience as important, if not more important, for some of them than the actual academic experience. So I think we're building on all of that. The city deal that we're involved in a minute, again, same issue arose. Working within to the regeneration plan, working within to preparation for city culture, placed us in an advanced state when the opportunities arose through city deals. And we have a team of people who worked together before. So that accelerated development and partnerships and people, as well as accelerated development and infrastructure is what's pushing us ahead now, I think, of other cities.
One of the reasons I'm interested in this is because every city that goes through, all those 71 that you mentioned have been through, have all said about how it's enhanced the image of the place. And part of my thing as chair is sort of like quantifying the actual value of the whole thing. And at the moment, I'm putting about, the award is probably worth about 350 million in total. That includes the BBC engagement and the exposure and the media exposure and all that kind of thing. So if you guys could quantify what a change in perception makes to the city, that would be really great too. So, but also it makes everybody feel, as soon as you start talking about that, it actually makes people feel it is real, it is realistic, it is worth actually, it's a prize worth fighting for. And then Jonathan, it's back to how we develop the framework, isn't it? How can we build this framework, do you think? That can actually take in all these completely different levels and all that. And what I'm also pushing for here, I'm just conscious of the time as well. I'm looking to 2029. I've already threw it out there. Should we be doing more evaluation at the actual bid process rather than really rely on the leap of faith and think these are the guys who are going to deliver the best ever city of culture? Or should we just say, well, that sounds great, but the numbers are rubbish?
The trick will be, I think, to try and reach either a national or a UK agreement about what the outcomes and impact for major events, not just City of Culture, and how we would measure and how we know them. But then the competition comes about your plan for activities and outputs that will deliver against that contribution. So there has to be a bespoke local place and event dimension to it, otherwise it just becomes homogenous and and bland. So you have to find that trick of, we're going to measure everything fairly, we're going to do it consistently, each event builds on the next, it gets closer and closer to delivering more and more value because we're more productive, we're better at doing it, and we're better at understanding it. But your place and your people have to decide how they're going to do that. And if you can get that combination, and we'll give you easy, simple, wherever possible, national ways of measuring that, so that if you don't have a household survey, there are other ways in which you can do it. So a lot of support with that. But you have to keep, absolutely, the local passion, the local love, what our story, our place, has to be allowed some room in that framework.
Great. So if you can build that framework, and we can start working on the evaluation, that get us a better hearing of the Treasury, do you think?
Yeah, I think it does. I think
that's all we need.
Yeah, that's. I would say the Green Book, as many of it is an interesting document because it's very vague in places. And what it means basically, you've got an opportunity to use different types of evidence if it fits within that approach they take, and that's what we're doing on the Cultural Capital Programme. I've got a new method which values maintenance and conservation of buildings, which fits within the Green Book. So they were surprised when they saw that. They're like, oh, okay, you beat us at our own game. You actually used our words. And that is the other thing, is it's all about the words you use as well, the narrative. And this is where economists can help, is turning what creative people say, it meaning exactly the same thing, but using that language of economists. And that's where Treasury go, okay, we recognise this. I think that's quite important as well.
Great. All right. Well, I'm looking at that, and I think we're going to go to a general Q&A now. Thank you. I think you guys can get off the stage if you want to. Right. Are these all for me, or I'll Brilliant. First one says PTO. Is it time for an All-Ireland City of Culture competition? Why not? The question there, I mean, not only who will evaluate it, but who will actually run the thing. You know? Right. And as we haven't figured out how to get sausages from Belfast to Dublin yet, you know, I think that would be a fantastic cultural challenge. But we can take it away, can we not? There's many different cultures, but there's still a divide. What's that one? How our city benefited? Who wants to answer that question? Well, there are many different cultures, but there's still a divide. How has our city benefited? I need somebody local to answer that one. There we go.
I'll try and provoke somebody. I think the answer comes back to a different definition of culture. And I always come back to that Raymond Williams thing that I mentioned earlier. Culture is everyday lived experience. So it doesn't matter after that necessarily what one's ethnicity is, what one's gender preference is, what one's religious preference is. You're using those things as a filter in which to identify what people share in terms of their everyday lived experience. And then if you start from there, you can construct infrastructural pieces, because it was very interesting you're asking about the social values. The key part of any of this is always what are the social and cultural dividends that came about from that. And if you start to think of dividends, you can measure dividends in the same way as the co-op used to do. And I think it's that thing about accepting that culture is not defined by necessarily who we are, but by the lived experience we have.
I'm just flicking through these, and a lot of these are very, very specific local questions, which I am not qualified to answer, you know. But I think there's a general, on those last 6 I've just flicked through, there's a general point, which I think, again, someone might want to stand up and say, and basically what everybody's saying, it's a bit like the Romans and Monty Python, what has City of Culture ever done for us? You know, so what is... Anybody again give a general view about what the feel is in the city by 2030? You're going to take that on?
Yes, thank you. You know, your joke about the Romans is actually interesting because as the event was going on, I wondered, where does the word culture come from? And it actually comes from the Latin word cultura, which means to live, to cultivate, and to honor. And the term cultura comes from cultivate the earth. No? And this is the first sense of the word. But the second is to cultivate the spirit, to cultivate the mind. And I'm going to end with a quote from Cicero. He said, "As much as a field is fertile, it can only be productive through culture. And it's the same for human. It cannot be productive without knowledge." And now that I have the mic, I just would like to highlight the fact that what really struck for me today was this idea of the spirit of partnership and collaboration and have everyone in one room. And I don't know if you saw, perhaps some of you turned towards this table where we had young people sitting here. And there were some of them coming out, coming in, talking between themselves. And I think that if it's good for young people, it's good for everyone else. If it's good for everyone else, it's good for young people. And to end with this analogy, imagine an arrow with a pointy thing. The pointy thing is the young people and we're the shaft. And we have to try to move this. So Bradford is actually also showing the way, and Derry has also. Thank you.
You know what? This is brilliant. It makes me really feel like I'm still in Liverpool. Everybody saying, like, well, what's in it for me? What's all this about? What's all that about? You know, what's it ever done for me, etc. Well, you know, I'll answer this in generic terms. You know, really, I had a set to with the BBC yesterday on the radio, which probably they said it'd be transmitted round about now. But I think of this thing about was there a missed opportunity here in Derry? I think that's what all these kind of things come down to. It's all about, you know, why isn't there more culture? Why isn't there more infrastructure? Why isn't there more things, this, that, and the other? But the point is, you can't look at it like that. You know, you've got to look at it about the point. And I've referenced it really one line earlier, saying about Derry grabbed that moment in 2013, the same way that Liverpool grabbed the moment in 2008 to do something to put the city back on the map. And into the words of David Henshaw, the chief executive at the time, to put them back in the game. That's what happened here in 2013. And remember, 2008. That was the world financial crash. And I remember, it's quite an interesting moment really. One of my roles was to guide royalty around the city and look after celebrities and step in for anybody who didn't turn up for a conference. And one day I got a call and said, Alistair Darling can't make it to the economic forum in the county. Will you go and step in for him? I said, yeah, provided I can go in and reduce tax and give everybody a thing. But one of the questions the media was battering me about was that, well, this is a disaster, isn't it? Just as you think you're going to get out you're going to get out of the mud, world economic crisis has just absolutely crushed you, isn't it? It's a complete waste of time, isn't it? And I remember the answer I gave it to him and say, no, maybe we're at the bottom. The world financial crash had no impact on our city. The only thing we can do now is go up, you know. And I think you have to kind of take that view to it. You know, that when we came here, when we set the process up in 2011 and 2012, 2013, that was the feeling of the city. That's what it felt. I could feel it while I was here. And so also remember, I said this morning that we didn't know what city of culture actually was then. We didn't know what the cultural tools were. We didn't know what you could actually get out of it. We've got a much better understanding now, which is why I'm asking the economists to talk a little bit about what we want to get out of, what we expect to get out of, where we're going to go, what the value of it is. But at the same time, you know, it is up to individuals to take responsibility for what they want. You know, you can't just stand there and say, well, what's in it for me? You haven't done anything for me, you know. And it's, can't get it all. So you give it the mic.
Yes, I'm saying, sorry, and I've worked in arts in the city for exactly 40 years, actually, when I finished university. And the only times when I've had to stop working in the arts in the city is to earn money, because you can't live or make a living as a cultural practitioner unless you're an administrator of an organization. You can't live as an artist. Even the most high-profile artists in the city have to work in education to make ends meet. And this says it all for me today, that there is no cultural or artistic voices from the city talking here about cracking the cultural code. Okay, that's what so it's not just that you get up and want it and campaign for it. Myself and other people have been doing that for years. People have to value local artists as well as outside artists coming in. And artists aren't valued. It'll be the local artists who are going out tonight on culture night into the city, into the communities, bringing culture to the various populations in Derry. And most of those artists are unpaid, are very low paid. And it's very hard to live on as an artist in the Northwest. If you want to go away, you can go away and make a living as an artist. But if you want to stay here and add to the cultural value in your area, to bring culture into areas of community well-being, it's very difficult. because you're not funded. So what Derry City Council can be doing, and one thing they have done is have even though it's not very much money, they have brought in a creative practitioner fund, which I'm glad of, is to keep lobbying the Arts Council, because it's the Individual Artists Award from the Arts Council. Is that been cut back? So in a way, after all these years, it's quite demoralising to say it's not that people aren't fighting or to have the voices of the artists heard. We're sick, sore and tired of doing that. And for Michael, the city's economist, I would think one thing that could be done, Michael, in city culture, there was a very good scheme which the Nerve Centre administered, and I think it was 20 awards, £5,000 to local artists. I think it would be good to evaluate what those local artists are doing now, because I know that quite a few of them have given up, demoralised, because they cannot stay here and earn a living as an artist.
I agree with you. But the point I'm making is the fact when I say about it's up to individuals to act exactly what you do. You've got to get into these debates, and you've got to work out a strategy. But the problem is that the pressure on public funds is so great now. And my crack this morning about the fact that culture is the frontline services. It's so easy for every local authority to make cuts in culture and art budgets, because they're under this pressure of frontline services first. So that's the debate that has to be had. Where does culture fit within that? And we are only now beginning to realise what it is. I mean, we pioneered in 2008 social prescribing, by actually getting people engaged in art, engaged in cultural activity, to reduce loneliness, to reduce depression, reduce the actual bill. And the apocryphal tale in Liverpool, I think, tranquilizer bill dropped by 40 million across the year. But there's a basic truth in that visits to GP surgeries did drop on Monday mornings. And I remember there's a project, when I inherited the project, there was a project about brightening up the operating theatres in the Children's All-Day Hospital, right? And I looked at this and thought, what the hell is this? Right? I didn't even get it myself then. And then later on in the year, I was in a charity auction bidding to support All-Day Hospital. I actually bought or paid for the artist to go in and do it. So it's not about, oh, funds are cut. The argument is about why are they being cut? And where does culture actually fit within all those other aspects, and where does it fit in with the other social services? But I also have to say to you that you have to face up to the reality is there's no God-given right to be funded. Just because you decide you're going to be an artist, or you're going to be a writer, or you're going to be a musician, you've got no God-given right to be funded. You have to create value somewhere down the chain, so that either a council will fund you because they say it's part of a cultural strategy, or a company will fund you because they say it's part of their production, or an individual will sponsor you because they think it's something worthwhile. And that's a hard reality of life. We all have to do that. I had to do that as a writer. I lived for years without any cash, hand to mouth and everything. Sold my car, sold this, sold that, until I eventually got to the point when I could start selling my work. And then I eventually got to the point of building the companies and things like this. But we have to accept that too, So first of all, we have to decide what the cultural value is. Then you have to accept what your particular individual contribution is to that value. And then you can start having the argument. But unfortunately, there is no right to public funding just because you want to be an artist. We say the same things, but we're coming at it from different directions, I think. And remember, I am a visitor here today. I don't know the subtleties, and I don't know the local current underneath these things. I can only talk my own experience, and I can talk from working in Liverpool. So, yeah.
Thanks. Just before going to my question, sorry, Phil, on your last point there, I guess the problem with the model you mentioned there for artists finding a way to make money or not assuming that they can get funding, that's a recipe for magnetizing arts towards wealthier areas, because there are areas where the councils have more money. They've got a larger business pool, business rates. It's areas where you have more wealthy people who can afford to value the arts. And it means that poorer areas like the northwest of this island, or northwest of Northern Ireland, don't have so many of those people and so much of that money to pay for arts. And that's part of the problem, I guess, why artists tend to gravitate towards area where there's more money, because it's basically, do I eat or do I continue on in art? And in someone like, as this lady mentioned very eloquently, in Northern Ireland, there's places where you can make a living out of arts. The city is one of the harder places to do that. But the point I wanted to raise, and this is hopefully a recommendation I would make for future cities of culture. We've talked a lot about how in Derry expectations have been increased since 2013. All the soft stuff has been fantastic since 2013 in the city. Derry's horizon has been lifted. The confidence of the city has been lifted. There's great organisations which have been created since 2013 who are doing fantastic work. And I was speaking to my friend Maurice Kelly, who does Orchestra Northwest and Allegri, and his colleagues there as well. But the problem, I think, it's like trying to grow a child, where the muscle grows and the skin grows and the tissue grows, but the bones don't. And the bones is the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure that enables and holds the stuff together. So for me, one of the biggest problems with the city culture, I cannot point to anything physical in this city that is a result directly of 2013, apart from an illuminated sign at the top of a factory that says a stitch in time, which ironically was almost removed 2 years ago as well. Now, I think it'd be very important moving forward to City of Cultures, if one of the stipulations you have when you award this status to somewhere is that they have to deliver a physical legacy. The infrastructure around arts, culture, creativity has to be improved, because Derry was the first one. I think we really suffered. It's not helped by the fact that different situation in Liverpool and in England, but Northern Ireland, and it's a whinge we have in Derry, but it's genuinely true. Things get put in Belfast, and you're told that that's for all of Northern Ireland. It can't be, it won't be, and it never will be. And that's a problem we have with organisations like the Arts Council, who assume that things like the MAC in Belfast is funded for all of Northern Ireland. It is not, and it never will be, and it simply can't be. So moving forward, I think cities of culture need to be enabled and need to be stipulated that there's a physical legacy, because personally I think that's one of the things we really missed out in the city, is something that we can all point to beyond, the warm fuzzy feeling inside, and all those groups who are doing fantastic work around the city have somewhere they can do it, relevant kitchen tables and underfunded community centres.
Yeah. Well, again, all that I can do is agree with you, But again, there's only so much that we can do through the actual program itself. I mean, we can award it into a city, and the city's used. And if you want to put it this way, the city can use it as a great marketing and perceptual change tool. But the infrastructure issue is attached to so many other. There's so many other agendas and criteria involved in that. And when we were looking at 2025, when I made the comment before about now it's part of the government cycle, it's part of the government machine. The other thing you have to take on board is what's called policy alignment. And so the levelling up process was part of the bidding, was part of the judging criteria last time. And, there are different plots and different sections and different allocations of cash. So the infrastructure needs to come within the strategic plan for the entire city, not just for the City of Culture. And we can ask for that, and we can look for it. And one of the things we do ask for is, what is the infrastructure of the city? But I've always been very clear that that should not be the tick box. Because if we say you've got to have a X number seat theatre, you've got to have an arena, you've got to be able to do this, you've got to be able to do that. That excludes so many places. Exactly what you're talking about here. That means we don't ever go to Belfast. So we've got to look at a thing of that. Where can we put this thing that might not have the infrastructure now, but if it actually is a catalyst to spark out something else, it might. Now, the other thing underneath that you have to remember is the size of the place. Because the fact that Bradford is 4 times bigger than Derry, you would then expect that the infrastructure should be bigger. And while the journal I was talking to the other day said he wants a big arena in Derry. I said, well, that's great, but who's going to fill it? They're very hard practical questions, and so infrastructure has to relate to the actual place. It has to be proportional, and these are not things that are unique to Derry. I've sat in other places and I've heard these same kind of things. And unfortunately, that's a kind of structural issue within our government or democratic system, or whichever way you want to put it. It's a structural issue within our society at the moment. So, but I think it's kind of like the two things, I don't think they're actually the same. But you have to ask the question, why?
A conscious decision was made to distribute cultural assets a bit more evenly around the Republic. I mentioned that the Irish National Opera House, Irish National Opera in the Republic is headquartered not in Dublin, but in Wexford, which is a population of 10,000 people. That was a conscious decision. Somebody sat down and made that conscious decision. We do not see those conscious decisions in Northern Ireland. It's all very well to sit back and say, well, Derry's only a certain size. It can only expect so much. Derry's big in Irish terms. It's a small city in UK terms. It's big in Irish terms. 4th biggest in the island, 2nd biggest in Northern Ireland. Conscious decisions need to be made to a bit more fairly distribute cultural assets around. And I don't think it's good enough to just say, you'll get what you get because you are what you are size-wise. Somebody needs to make conscious decisions to crack that nut.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I mean, that's an issue that applies to us all. I mean, it's kind of like the government in London or the Arts Council in London decides the English National Opera is getting out to London, it's going to Oldham. Like, well, hang on a minute, what's that about? It's just because they want to get them out of one coliseum and put them in the other. I mean, these decisions are happening all the time, and there's no logic to a lot of these things. But the other thing sometimes is the fact that things move because there is a local champion who's gone and fought for it and got it, and you can't deny them a victory, So again, I think it's a kind of, I'm sympathetic to everything you say, and and as I say, I just fall back on this thing. I don't know the subtleties of the politics here or whatever, but those kind of decisions will always happen if we have centralized government. I still can't hear you, I'm sorry, Small city, large.
About size, do you think there was a misleading propaganda about small city become huge?
It's like everything, isn't it? It's you have to distill everything down to what in the media is a soundbite.
Skeptic. Very simply because it worked within community arts within the city for 15 years or so before the City Culture Year. But I think everyone in the city, where we look at the legacy perspective, will agree that those who came together to deliver a year-long program of activity made a massive contribution to the city at the time. It was obviously, for those of us who lived here all our lives, understood we're coming out of a time of conflict, and it was painting a new picture of Derry, and it was giving a voice to the arts and cultural community in the city. And I think that's a very important thing that happened. I suppose, but there's a wee, a word of caution maybe in around, obviously, you're continuing the process of engaging with new cities of culture and stuff like this. And I think, both I think yourself and Aideen both quoted Seamus Heaney. I think there's another wee quote from him. The poet has a duty to do things larger than the good message. And I think this is back to what we expected from a city of culture, and what anyone expected from it was perhaps more than we could have really achieved. Now, what I would say, I suppose, to the other cities who are going through this process, our city has moved on from city of culture. You know, there isn't an awful lot of physical legacy, without a doubt. There is an infrastructure, and there is a very good, as Kevin pointed out earlier from the Playhouse, a good coming together of the arts and culture sector in the city. From 2019 onwards, we spent a lot of time with over, I think, about 400 local arts organisations and artists, individual artists engaged to deliver a strategy that we would look at from taking us forward as an arts and culture strategy for the city. Unfortunately, again, that has met with very little success, very simply because of the resource as a city. So while we talk here of the benefits, and the wee film to start is nostalgic and looks at all the way things that can be done, we couldn't do it again today because the resource isn't there, neither physical resource nor is the economic resource. And DCMS, you know, it's wonderful they have ministers here, I suppose, in the city, but we need to be talking, and I would suggest this to the other cities, talking about how does the real economic impact work. Liverpool had a great chance, but Liverpool was a European capital culture. Lots more money went into it than went into city of cultures. Lots more money potentially went into the legacy. So you could do a better job, and of course it's a bigger city. But this is a provincial competition outside of the major cities to try and support the growth of arts and culture within them cities, but also to reach into the communities. So I think there's a realism. I think it needs to be anticipated. I wrote the question, should we be considering an all-Ireland capital culture? I think on the island in the future, I think we need to be looking at the opportunities, because certainly I think there may be opportunities for more economic investment. Our arts sector and the people of the city came together because there was opportunity, and they were creatives were anxious to try and showcase their work and have the opportunity to showcase their work. And like you says, if you don't get the opportunity to create that profile, then your work goes unseen, and you end up still spending time, as hundreds of local artists do with us every year, spend their local time doing perhaps not what they had ambitions to do, but end up teaching and delivering. So what I'm saying, I suppose, to our cities and to yourself, I think it's a good idea to have these competitions. I think it's good, but we need to be very careful about the messages that and the aspirations that we're asking of a city of culture event, because we can live in our own propaganda, but at the end of the day, I just had a wee glimpse through what was on Radio Foil there, you know, and your evaluators won't talk about this, but your interview was run and the commentary's coming in, and on the ground in the city, you're talking about 90% of people saying that was all great, but what's the legacy? So I think it's important you keep on the ground and in touch with that in the future.
Hello. Could I just take you back to some of the points that were made here by this lady and this gentleman here about funding and not funding, and what Belfast gets and what Belfast doesn't get, right? I'm a wee bit biased because I'm a Belfast man myself, but I've chosen to live here for 30 years because I love this town. But let me just make a point. Belfast has just celebrated 35 years of field football. They'd started out with no funding. Belfast City Council would give it no funding for political reasons, as we all know, but it never stopped them. And now they're one of the most successful festivals in Europe. So what I'm saying, yes, funding's great if you can get it, but don't let it stop you, because the government and councils are letting us down. But we have to get our finger out and get the money ourselves, because it's not going to come to us. There's not a lot in the pot to go around, but it can be done, and Belfast has shown us. And one of my questions up there, why aren't these Belfast people here? Why haven't we asked them to say, and asked them, how did you do it? How did you set up such an amazing festival? And it's going 35 years without funding, with discrimination. So how did you do it? So ask them the question, how are you still going? And tell us in Derry, how you managed it. Thank you.
Yeah, once again, it's a question I can't answer, I'm afraid. But I think your point is the valid one. Every single time I've tried to counsels to say, do not promise bricks and mortar, do not promise job numbers. You know, the only thing you can promise is a change in spirit. You know, you can promise that you will raise people's spirits, you might raise aspirations, you might raise ambitions. And one of the things you have to remember all the time is that in every generation, in every place, you need to inspire about 6 people. 6 people who will make a difference. If you look at the way the world has been completely changed by technology, you can go back to the 80s in Silicon Valley, and you can count them all on a hand. Gates, Jobs, the Google twins, Robert Noyes, who was classed as the mayor of Silicon Valley. These were the people who pushed the technology on. They're the ones who changed that. Liverpool's time, you can go back and you can think about at the end of the 19th century when Liverpool was the richest city on earth for the time. You know, it was Leverhulme, Tate, Bibby. They come down to just a handful of people who grasped the opportunity at that time and pushed it on. You know. And that's why you remember what culture is. Culture is not a magic wand. It's not a panacea. You know, it can't solve everything, but it can give you a moment to launch something else, you know. And what we've learned, and in this public flagellation here, what I've learned too is the fact that, you know, you do have to be absolutely clear with people what culture can do and what it can achieve. You know. That's what you tell people they get in, you know, right? You know, that's what you have to do.
I was just going to say something kind of relating to that actually. So I was so inspired at City of Culture. I was working in a number of different jobs, and it was the edge to centre thing that really got me in terms of bringing everyone on board. So I met someone else who was equally as inspired that year, and we decided to set up a business. And that business, we've actually employed 40 people, and we're launching now in Australia next week. And it was all around a social movement, and it was about connecting people into their own communities, and it was about reducing isolation and improving quality of life. So we developed a tech platform, and it was really it was completely back to how we felt leading up to the City of Culture year, how inspired we were. We had brilliant mentors like Angela Hughes and Aidy McGinley, and just many people in this room who really inspired us and who we partnered with, and who still to this day we're working with. But that economic impact, it's how you measure that. You know, that's a business now that's grown and grown, 40 really good jobs. We've actually were acquired then by a large tech company based in England 2 years ago. So now they're putting more jobs into the region. We try and supply everything locally. We buy art, and we love to engage in lots of different things. So we're putting loads of money back in again. But that was down to how we felt leading up to that year, and how we just were like, no, we can do something. There is anything is possible. Like, we listened to all the great things that were said, and we couldn't see what we were looking for available. So we said, let's just do it ourselves. So I don't know how you measure that in terms of the whole wider economic impact of it, but it really was down to that.
Well, on that, can we? I'll just leave you one last thought, which is don't spend so much time like Liverpool did, looking back over its shoulder at what it used to have, so that you don't actually see where you're going. And I want to end on that positive note and ask, can I go now?